there's actually a particular.
One time we had out by means of the World Schools of Community Trust, and we were considering 35 different place-based education projects, and some of them border with service learning. For me, place-based is the umbrella category, right? And we had service learning, action research, we had some expeditionary projects as well. And so there was a beautiful variety that came out, and then we ended it did institutionalize it.
It's hard. Grants want you to do themselves.
The school wasn't mature enough to be able to incorporate it. And we left with the idea that K-12 is education, that we're sorely behind on this.
Copy is the same. There's another reason. The copy is the same. Perfect. This is excellent. Thank you so much for setting this up.
Yeah, because the anthropology I got to do anthropology or interdisciplinary anthropology, so I had some Americans to this course. And I taught it Mexican.
Yes, please do. Yes, and so many cans are down there. That's incredible. That's so cool.
Yeah, good.
Excellent.
Best wishes for success here as well.
Thank you.
I'm just blanking for a second.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah, Gomez or Carlos Vela. No, Carlos was anthropology. Vélez Ibanez. I know who you're talking about.
On the way home, I'll be texting Veronica. Amazing.
Oh, we know how
He
that
was
works.
so good to us. He was such a great guy. Great education. I was really happy with it.
Yeah, so I did PhD. My master's degree from Mexico, so I have surrounding state.
You're a true Southwestern.
Not there
Yeah,
yet.
yeah.
But it's
Well, this is the thing is
Chihuahua,
because
Sonora.
every year is
Diana,
system.
I guess last January.
So it wasn't
But it's just one document. It says draft, so I don't know what you mean.
to break down that one, not having New Mexico degree.
For the spring.
I assume if you have a connection to New Mexico,
Last year.
Yeah. Maybe not.
Well, I'm using something. And so that organ is very much. It's like, Southern Colorado is taken. They're much, you know.
the great chili war that we're experiencing. Actually, I've been kind of enjoying that. I think the governors have made it feel they have
I've been so now for our home.
I had this really cool picture of water that I was going to bring you. It's also fancy. So I put a infused water on the bill. And then I forgot it. Oh no. It's okay.
And myself being from Colorado. Sponsored
Sponsored
discussion.
by Colorado. Wait,
November. Yeah. Here.
Now, if you allow me a one-minute elevator speech. So my thinking is saying, this is so much Colorado.
Yeah, and at the
It's
time,
recognizing the right between southern
Jason's point of view was that the advisory board was supposed to do it.
Southern Colorado children.
So he was very good at it. That's what that was.
Yes.
You know, but the advisory
My
board
argument is
basically
saying, well,
didn't.
we know that Amish children is great, but it's
Found out
market
that
great.
Catholic
And our local farmers are
opened
subsistence.
the IDS Institute
Not for-
IDS, the instructional designers, like open
Yeah.
2-day thing.
It's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
So Colorado children is very good.
Jason's gone.
Don't-
That stuff.
So you have your own coffee, that's a good idea.
I know. Can I get you to sign in over there,
Of
please?
course, of course. A ver, Jesús.
Yeah, you know,
I was like, I wouldn't know their meetings, but I, you know, because I don't quite
they don't really
understand.
leave room
The
for
difference between
planning sessions. No, it's frustrating. So,
really
maybe
exciting.
we have a session.
You know,
they want to join, they can.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know. Or I mean, you could still do it.
Yeah. Either, whatever, I mean, I know the time is getting shorter and shorter.
Yeah.
So maybe if you think that would be a good thing, I could propose like a couple of different things. And we can
Isn't
just.
you and I would propose some things,
Okay.
and if other people are available, they can join us.
And, okay,
And
okay.
then it can get done.
I just didn't want to all the you.
And yeah, I mean, I think Anne would be useful since she's in education.
Yes.
But I think it's gonna be, I'm, you know, we offer. So that wants to go on some here, others can go here, and then you're bringing.
In French, and it turns out it's this old capital word, you know, that means something different, like by the river, and I was basically.
I'm gonna see that posture weird Sean.
And so finally a friend of mine just was like, Paula, please.
And that's
Like for years telling me,
Is
it's
supposed yeah, I didn't know where her name.
My friend's great, and then she
I
was
have a
tired.
friend who, you know, is the department, she's like, Paula.
So overdue.
Don't take them.
This is X-rated, you just want to keep it clean. Like, I didn't know anything. Walking around saying something.
They're inappropriate.
It wasn't a study abroad or
Eileen,
exchange.
who we love.
Yes, I've
So
seen her
I'm
name.
speaking my grand Spanish.
Yes. We like her.
Mystical stories of misunderstandings in inappropriate language.
You don't say that, yeah, but from coming in, you don't, it's okay, you know, you don't say nothing.
They're look forward. They're like little Legos and everything.
And I made him to see what the Legos were.
I teach in forestry, mostly
Hay comida.
Estamos tratando de pasar el
Thank you
curso
so much for being here today.
lo vamos a concluir de la semana que viene el curso de biología. Tiene énfasis
But I just realized, you had
Vamos
classes.
a discutirlo esta semana que
We have
viene.
classes. The problem is today there is no many classes.
Vale, porque date cuenta que este social working quiere incluir algo en cuanto a sus currículum de
Yeah, I was just telling her.
You made it. And I'm happy that you made it because some people didn't make it today.
Lo que va a ser como de énfasis
He wanted to go see.
la inclusión de la integración ambiental afecta
Interested in
diferencialmente a los
a number of reasons. And he said, well, just go walk around the community and he's gonna go down to the museum. I'm like, well, I can't do that. What's with you? And, you know, I'm kind of glad. So we drove up, but we came up and yeah, we loved the house.
una serie de diferentes
Is she coming? Is she gonna?
tipos, a lo mejor es que lo podemos combinar de una manera u otra.
Hi, nice to meet you. I teach biology.
Biology, pleasure to meet you.
Well, sometimes they tend to be on Zoom.
They're to trick us lower.
They've heard it before.
I'm a biology professor.
Eric
This is
No, you
nice.
can't.
These are my
I
people.
thought he was going to be there for the comment later.
Eric
Arts
can't.
and sciences, so I'm
Yeah.
feeling, you know, I'm with my tribe. Arts and sciences.
Right?
Yeah, Eric's doing the HIV testing.
But he says he will be here in the episode. He's going to be there for the
Really? I don't know.
I just ran into him. I said,
Oh, I told him that it was. You know, the cookies.
He's wrong. I will ask him. He said,
Hey.
"Who works for
This is gonna be a distracting thing for me. These Legos.
He's still
You're silly.
Es como alter ego, ¿no?
Yo hago un chaleco bonito.
Gracias, gracias.
Estoy
Somos multiculturales.
Veronica, would you like to ease into it, even though there's, or
I'm gonna
small
play
but
this
mighty?
guy.
We can play with it and we'll start and as people come along, I think,
Yeah, let's do that.
I can know much ahead of time. And I'm gonna have
Okay, okay. Well, I'll make sure to send when I get home this weekend. I will send a copy of the information. And the last activity we'll be doing, you haven't had a chance to ask me, there's other things that we can follow up. We'll just be playing with a few apps. And so if there's something that I'll get back to, I'll personally respond.
Yeah, and I'll send it out personally to everyone that's here, and then I will also put it on the CTE website. So
Did you have a sign in?
I did. It's right over in the corner, but yeah.
All right, so welcome, and I'm going to do this. This workshop was designed a couple of years ago, and for I think you may know Ann Wolf, who's a friend of mine. We actually met on the tennis court, so she's a great lady. I guess she couldn't be here today, but this was we were actually talking as we were hitting, and she said, "Oh, you've got to give us some background on this in a project that I was working on." But she has some specific things that she wanted covered. If I can get well, maybe. There we go. So first of all, we always start about how can service learning help our students? And the first part of this presentation and discussion and activities are all about understanding service learning and defining service learning as we need it defined in our institution. So what does New Mexico Highlands need? What does your department need? What does in some cases, your specific discipline need? What am I not doing here?
Maybe if we move it a little bit.
There it goes. Never mind. I just need to keep.
Bounce it off the window.
And then I want to talk about different methods of offering service learning, which I think, it's fun. The first part is so exciting, and it's fun to talk about service learning, what we can do. But as faculty, administrators, staff, how do we make it work? How do we make it work? And then the last part.
You can use the mouse too. The mouse will work. Yeah.
The mouse will work just fine. I think that's what I might do. And since there's just a small group, if you don't mind, I don't want to stand up all the time. The last part, when I originally created this for New Mexico Highlands, the School of Education was looking at their traits, which then we were looking at, I started to add the broader strategic plan. And I think I can go over that fairly quickly and give you some exciting things, because there is some good news about this work that'll help you move forward in meeting the New Mexico essential skills, which have just come out. If you've been watching some of the transfer work that came out of the Dameron administration and New Mexico Higher Ed Department. So there's some exciting stuff going on. Hopefully this thing isn't so. Okay, introduction. So just everybody knows each other, right? So there's no, I have all kinds of things. So as long as we
way back.
For family.
We are kind of family, yeah. we share.
We're married.
Very true here.
We're married.
We are big family.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And then they are my family with him too.
I love this. I absolutely love this. That is my So the big picture is, what are the benefits of service learning? I want to remind you that there's both direct and indirect. And so the stuff we always talk about, engaging the community. So if you just go to the Wikipedia sites, the big sites about service learning, it's about community engagement. And sometimes service learning and community engagement are the same thing, although they don't always look the same in practice. Whoops.
Yeah, it looks like it has
Okay.
I think he remembers and applies those.
There we go. The benefits of service learning. I'll just, what's it doing?
Oh no.
The benefits of service learning. It's the key to this understanding is this is a hands-on experience for the student. And some programs, like when I think of forestry, obviously, right? Yeah, it's going to be very hands-on. The whole coursework is hands-on. So this may not be a need that you need to meet, but it could be that your graduates need to enhance their resume. They might need some life skills. They want to show that maybe they've gone above and beyond. The indirect, and I mentioned this just before, is the New Mexico Higher Education Department has just released a few goals, and we'll be talking about these in a minute, but you want to, as a department, as a school, as a university, you're in your specific discipline, whether you're a program that grants a degree, you want to be able to reflect that you are meeting these New Mexico State higher ed goals, and one of the essential skills is community engagement. This is classic stuff. It's also a great retention strategy. The research is pretty compelling.
Right. I was wondering, this is very important for retention.
That when students have this, and
Oh, yeah.
when the folks talking about this, there's different ways that they have, it affects the retention, because when you're doing service learning, you're doing it from a different, you're having the hands-on experience, right? You're also challenged in that you're engaging something that is unusual. You're engaging an agency within the community, for example. There's a cognitive process, because often this is unique. This might be a new experience. And so students, we find, actually have, this is supposed to help the brain. This is a different way of learning. And the key is that this is called a high impact practice. And when I think about teaching, one of the things is, don't forget, we can think small. For example, a high impact practice in a music class may be an embedded requirement that the student must go see a live performance of this type of music. So this is an active, they're doing something outside the classroom that involves action. In sociology, I have my students Google themselves. We might do that in a comm class as well, because the students might need to understand how information is portrayed on the web. And by looking at their own identification on the web, their own what we call digital footprint, the students are then interacting in a way with information that they don't normally say in a traditional sociology class. I'm lecturing on Max Weber. Another example is where the students, I have the students do an observation. So they do an ethnographic observation. So this is embedded in the curriculum. So these are the things that when we talk about high impact practices. And notice I mentioned the American Association of Colleges and Universities. About 15 years ago, they put together what we call the LEAP goals. And we're now starting to see these trickle through, and you'll see this in part 3. The concepts about what higher education should be in society, including, and its communication, critical thinking, mathematical literacy, life skills, and we're now starting to talk about the future of work and things like flexibility, adaptability, that our degrees might be, you come from it multidisciplinary experiences, that in fact everybody's life is going to be much more multidisciplinary, that we have degrees that we've never seen before. And I was looking at higher ed jobs it was The Guardian, and they had an advertisement for a PhD in bovine nutrition. Oh my, dang! I didn't know that existed. The degrees don't even exist the way we now conceptualize. Pardon?
Can you get a PhD in A?
I imagine you came out of biology or zoology, and
Why not?
Well, that's kind of one of the big discussions within the higher education department, is what they're recognizing as PhD programs, and specialization is getting to a degree that the title is maybe 7 different indicators and parameters, rather than this is a biology degree, it's biology,
Oh, that's animal sciences. Yeah, that's not biology.
but even animal science, but the idea, like with most disciplines come out of this 19th century's constructure, and we have these national organizations, and they manage, and they've got conferences, and they've got publications, and I mean, the American Historical Association, American Sociological Association, these monster associations. I think that is the American Chemical Society. I'm trying to think on the STEM side. Huge, and they kind of regulate how academic professionals will be. I think this is rapidly changing. The good news when we get to part 3 is you'll see that New Mexico Highlands is along the lines of what these LEAP goals were, or from the 15 years ago, and they're now starting to trickle down into the strategic plan.
Well, there's a direct relationship between what higher education determines those learning outcomes for the liberal arts core curriculum. And I think that's going to be the trick, is translating, saying, yeah, they're inserted within the new assessment criteria for the core curriculum, but how does that transfer into content and depth of knowledge and the major minor areas of emphasis? I think that's kind of a big problem, is being able to transition, say, well, this is the learning, and this is the area of communication, critical thinking. There's a civic engagement component that's in that. Now, how does it, if it's limited to being the liberal arts core, then how easy is that for a transfer into content and major minor emphasis?
Absolutely. And I think that service learning is an example, because in many ways it's a micro practice that can transfer easily into, you can take it with you, depending on how you do this. I said it's more of a micro practice, and I'll show you here in just a second. Yeah, it's a smaller way, because really, and I'm jumping ahead here. I'm going to skip this. This is wonderful, this little video about experiential learning. Do you all feel comfortable understanding experiential learning? And I was expecting, you know, when Veronica and I were talking, she said it's in the student center. I was imagining this. I was like, well, I should have a video, but this is an older video about, you know, when you think about a child and how a child learns, right? And we would even say it's classic empiricism, right? They, you know, they touch something, they taste it, they look at it, they interact. And so this is the type of learning, as opposed to what I think our external partners see as the kind of what I would call book learning, right? So if you're interested, again, I'll send you this. Pardon?
We want to know about the video, because
You want to watch the video? Okay, let's
we
see.
can teach other people. You know, it's a tool for us to.
It's cute. It's still the #1 if you do when I do a YouTube search, it should come up here. The YouTube search is still the #1 for experiential learning. I thought, I'm gonna leave it in there because it's. Come on.
Is it having attitude? Presentation mode first.
There it goes. I thought that was adorable, and it kind of hits to the point of what high impact practices are, right? You have an experience that is unusual, so it triggers new parts of the brain, and these experiences then help the student learn. Oh, good grief. And this is not without a lot of study, of course, and here's Kolb. Kolb is the same author that talks a lot about moral development, if you might be familiar with his work. The concrete experience, the reflective observation, the abstract conceptualization, and the active experimentation, these things run in a loop for him. I think the most important thing to remember is that they're, just like they mentioned with the musician, reflection is key to doing service learning. As a faculty member or an administrator, one of the things I would want to see as evidence is some type of reflection on whatever experience the student had. So that's key to demonstrating that the experience occurred and whatever level of competency you associate with that experience. And I'm looking at Blanca thinking everything from throwing an axe properly to understanding chemical, you know what I'm saying? That there's a difference between what I would study in class, maybe in her, and I would understand that this is flammable, this is not flammable, this is how this is, works as a retardant, but actually doing it is a very different experience cognitively. And I want to take some time to reflect. Go ahead, Aaron.
But you know, I think we're in the choir here in recognizing this, you know, but I'm still seeing kind of in social sciences, particularly at that phenomenology, epistemology stage, there's still reluctance to accept that, you know, human learning, human experience is directly tied into cognitive. I think we're still struggling with that in social sciences in a big degree and understanding more social sciences are somewhere between humanities, which is very interpretation driven, and sciences that are observation and measurement and such. And I see it's still very much an identity issue, and this is at the center of the identity issue, is how to recognize experience within cognitive structuring.
I think so. I think that's good. I think I might have an answer for you here. And I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to go back to Joshua Eiler's work. The good news is that even in humanities, anything that gets the student out of the classroom to have them engage in new experience or out of the typical environment, it might be, in Jesus' example, maybe a lab, getting them out of the lab and having them do something more active. And I can give you a personal example too. I was a work study way back in the day, and my work study ironically landed me in the archives of Kansas City Archives. I ended up writing my honors thesis on the welfare state. Pre-1936. And it was a real experiential learning moment for me because I had to actually go through and pull, you know, the literally working in a live archive that was actually quite dilapidated and old. And it gave me much more experience with primary sources than I would have had sitting in a classroom going over, you know, this is the letter from, you know, Mary Stuart to possible conspirator that led to her beheading. So work study is one example, and obviously it's tied to a lot of other structures and Title IV and funding. When I talk to the ed folks, they have a lot of other experiences that are required of students. For example, field experience, practicums, and cooperative education are largely, you know, those are languages, that's a language used a lot in education, whether it's elementary, pre-K, all the way up through high school and even beyond in some cases. So the idea that the student might have a student-teacher experience in a setting, in the school setting. But that doesn't mean that they're unique to education. And I'll give you an example, for example, practicums, which New Mexico PED has. Practicums, believe it or not, are also pretty common in theater programs. So the actual production, whether I'm building the set for the stage, whether I'm an actress, whether I'm directing directing whatever I'm doing, that's practicum credit. And so I think we can think of practicum in broader ways. And one of the things I'm going to keep coming back to is I think at New Mexico Highlands University, within your department, within your division, within your program, you want to take the initiative and make the definitions yours within what are acceptable New Mexico language. And I can certainly help you with some of this, but largely, for example, internships. So Central New Mexico Community College, and I'll give you my story. I, like many faculty, was at a college in Arizona. We did service learning, but as Eric said, sometimes it was certain departments that it seemed easier for them to do. And then I went to the Midwest, and the Midwest happens to have robust service learning programs. And they have it through what we call staff, what we would say staff management. You go to the office, like you go to the ROTC, right, Sarah? You go to that office and that's where it happens. You don't go anywhere else. This is the person who does the work. Often that person also worked with, say, the nurses in their clinical practices. They might work with those, making those contracts between the radiology team and the hospital so that the students had an opportunity. They might work with apprenticeships, which largely in the US are vocational tech. It's not always the case. We go to Germany where there's 500,000 apprenticeships each year, where apprenticeships are much broader than just electrical carpentry. But, and then at CNM, I had this experience as an associate dean where I think you've had this happen to you, where you were voluntold. You have that word? Paula's good at bringing people together. She'll get them on track. And so we worked with a grant that was helping us put together a rubric, an understanding of what we considered our work education experience. And I mean, New Mexico Highlands isn't a huge institution, but it's big. And each division has its own works and outlines and external bodies that it answers to. So how do you define internship? Many institutions nationally, an internship is something you get paid for. If you do an unpaid internship, and boy, take some time to think about how you're going to set your definitions of an unpaid internship, make sure you're aware of the literature about internships where we have some seriously disturbing examples of where students who participated in internships were taken advantage of. As a faculty member, I would be appalled if I found out that my student was basically, I was expecting them in a sociology, they're going to work in a corporation, they're supposed to study group dynamics, and all they were doing was making copies and getting coffee. As an administrator, I'm a little concerned because I'm going to have other citizens calling me up and saying, hey, your interns, your free interns took advantage and they're getting paid for jobs that should be full-time pay with benefits. And now you're competing with citizens. So this is not good for the institution. So when we think about work education experience, whether it's service learning, job shadowing, what does that mean? We're thinking of several things. One of them, we're defining how many hours the student is going to do this. And the cheat sheet, I'll give it to you, I'll give you the answer here now. 30 hours a semester, 15, 16-week semester is what is the norm for a service learning experience. PED will set different hourly requirements for things like field experience if you're in education or cooperative education. However, if you're not beholden to an external agency, you might think about the difference between field experience and service learning. Service learning, 30 hours, it's also best, and I'm going to wink, wink, nudge, nudge, tell you, the most serious conversation we had in our committee was whether or not you could do service learning for a private organization. Don't do it. If you're going to do a private organization, work and develop your concepts of internships and job shadowing, which might be a much shorter period than an internship. And what are the outcomes you want? The thing about service learning, unlike, say, doing teacher training where I think of student teacher learning, or volunteerism, where I just take my sociology students for a day and we go over and we help the local food bank. Service learning is tied to a student learning outcome in your course. Hopefully this feeds into the program, which feeds into the degree, and hopefully the goals of the department and the institution. Does that make sense? So it's a small activity, a micro activity. It's a small one. 30 hours in a semester is not, sounds like a lot, but it's not. Compared to, for example, my friend says, field experience in New Mexico, PED is going to require 120 hours.
Well, I'm following what you're saying, and I see that as the big image. And again, that stigma of community service, of you wear an orange jumpsuit to go to community service, but it's free labor, it's volunteerism. The service learning aspect, I appreciate that you're saying there's learning objectives that tie in. Will you be addressing the different kind of mechanisms of how it comes back and loops into curriculum and loops into? Because my understanding is that there should be some mechanisms so that if you have a singular student doing the service work, shares it with the other students that are within that particular classroom. And I've struggled with that, is how to bring it in so others benefit from it because they don't have the experience of doing that placement.
Absolutely. That's one of the many headaches. But I really think too, make sure you're defining what it is, right? With service learning, it is a community. You're engaging with and I highly recommend that you decide it's a nonprofit and the student does 30 hours work with that organization. We'll talk about the different types as well. In fact, come back to this, let's see. This is all my selling points, the basics, right? Established form of experiential learning. A form of experiential learning, it's designed to enhance and enriching the experience in that course material. So it's tied directly to. So when I think of the example of a colleague of mine where the students are working with forage farmers, it's a vet, so they're growing heritage chilies, believe it or not, with a local organization where the vets who are having struggles getting back into the community have set up this local farm with some grant funding. They go, they farm, they interact, and they come back and write a reflective essay using C. Wright Mills' sociological imagination. That's a major outcome in our course, Introduction to Sociology, and it's a major outcome for all our sociology majors. This is, if you can't think that way, you're in trouble. And in many cases, some of our colleagues are designing so a major course outcome is met only by service learning. So in our surgical tech, she had professionalism was one of her major outcomes in her program. It's actually part of a state licensure. And so the student had to work in some organizations that she was liaising with, and that the student was demonstrating professionalism. It also, again, the AACC, which is the American Association of Community College, talks about personal and reflective thinking and civic responsibility. And again, when you think about this, make sure you're comfortable, because again, internships can be disastrous for the department, the student, ultimately, which I think is the saddest thing. If they're taken advantage of, or there's an unfortunate, abuse of the student simply using them when you should be hiring an employee, that might be something to consider. On the other hand, we had a student who wasn't necessarily paid, but for one of our communications programs, she was sent to New York City, talk about glamorous, and worked for Vogue magazine, and for a summer. And so we made sure to give her, the student service learning credit. Pardon?
Vogue, did they pay her?
No, but they basically paid all her expenses. So they flew her in, gave her a place to stay, fed her. Yeah, I mean, she was like, can I get some? And so one of the things that we were working with her was, could she get internship credit? And interestingly enough, and the woman's name is Bernadette Bell, if you've ever come across her, she's wonderful and helped us manage the grant. But we came up with literally a catalog so that we understood what these all meant. So I don't know, for example, in forestry, do we have apprenticeships where folks can go work for agencies or companies and actually work their way into it? Do we have examples of field experience that are built into the curriculum? Volunteerism, I think, is actually a great thing. It can really do a lot of good for the students. It's a great way. Talk about a retention strategy, right? We all go down and our department takes everybody down, and we go once a year and once a semester actually, and help out at the local food bank. It's good in creating ties between individuals and making students feel good. But the service learning is different in that it must be tied to a student learning outcome. And that is one of the things that any agency that talks about it says it's important. FERCO, if you're interested in the research, which I always am, I'm kind of a nerd that way, is former vice president at University of Minnesota. And so these guys came out of the 1970s. And in fact, at CNM, we had a pretty robust service learning department until the person who ran our service learning department was bumped up to Dean of Students. And then, you know, he was dealing with so many other things that he didn't have the energy to really help us do some of the challenging things with service learning. The other major headache, I'll go back to this, for service learning is the fretting over the vetting. Oh, the vetting, right? So as you said, the students have this other experience. Well, did they have a good experience? How do I know as a faculty member? Did they follow the student code of conduct? Do we have, like I had it enjoyed in Minnesota, I could go to Wanda. Wanda would pull out the drawer and she'd go, yes, this particular social service agency needs a lot of help. We've had great experiences. We know that they, one of the big things was, do they have a non-discrimination policy? Was one of our big concerns. You know, boom, 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 no problem. And so she would sign off, we'd set up the student, bada bing, bada bing. CNM no longer has that resource, somebody to do that. So now I'm a faculty member, and I don't know about y'all, but you're probably going, I've got to get that paper out, I've got that R&R, I've got to do the class prep, and now I've got to go vet. I don't know anything. And until I spent some time with the New Mexico Center for Nonprofit Excellence, I wouldn't have even known how to vet, right? You make a site visit, it looks good. How do I verify that somebody is the director? And then of course, as an administrator, forgive me, this is just horrible because we're always worried about liability, right? How is this gonna play on the cover of the local newspaper if something goes wrong? You know, we hold the student to the student code of conduct. How do we make sure that the student is protected? What degree of liability do we incur as faculty? And on the one hand, we have the tension, which is, you know, if I'm a faculty member, and I am, I want to have some freedom, right? I know this organization, I know these folks, I know they're good people, it'll be a great experience, it'll help the students meet this learning goal. On the other hand, you know, am I on the hook now? Do I have to do all this paperwork? Is it enough to say, or do I have to go through some process where somebody is actually signing off on this? So what we did, our solution to this was sometimes less liability is the best. And what we had is the student get the signature of the director. And the faculty's role was only verifying that the person who is saying that they're the director, they're agreeing that they follow certain policies, they're non-discriminatory, etc. The student gets a signature. It's in the file for a year as per New Mexico records laws, and that's it. Does that make sense? Because this is something that we just, we couldn't figure out, you know. And I had a similar episode with, speaking of a high impact learning practice, field trips. Doesn't sound like a big deal until you realize, speaking of Arizona, Pima Community College, which is where I work, had a major lawsuit with a situation where a student was told they only had, they had to come to an art museum for a class period. They had no choice, there was no alternative assignment. The student was in a car accident, promulgated them. Guess who they sued? So believe me, this is the last thing you want when you're trying to manage this, but at the same time, I don't want lawyers dictating my teaching. I want my students to have a good experience. So these are the things that we fretted over. How to vet and how to ensure the student safety. Go ahead, Martha, you want to say something?
In that case, was the fall of the profession?
Mm-hmm. But to say that the student had no alternative.
Yeah.
So a little piece of legal advice is what we discovered was that in fact no liability was better than liability. So simply you could say we are going to meet Wednesday at class at the New Mexico History Museum. Here's the assignment. If you can't come, here's the alternative assignment. It's available in the LMS. And faculty do not give a student a ride and do not organize how to get there. If the student agrees to a service learning experience, they get themselves to the student, then they take the responsibility, and they have registered, they have chosen this pathway. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm looking to see, kind of where is that positioned? Because again, to some degree, there's an accountability and design on the part of the students. The employers themselves have to identify. And so it's not a singular entity that has to clarify that. I appreciate what you mentioned as far as saying, let's look at kind of criteria for understanding what it is. And the transferability. Right now, Highlands University is, our Office of Institutional Research is trying to calibrate where our community involvement is at. And there's no rubric, no indication. Community involvement could mean so many different things, and there's no idea of what it is. So it's just visiting, well, who do we have memorandums of understanding, but nothing qualitative in place that speak to the integrity of where those collaborations are. And this is going precisely that direction as a prognostic, right?
Well, and really, in many ways, this is still a young movement. I remember my first gig, I got the chump job because there's new faculty being the assessment coordinator. Because assessment was something nobody wanted to touch. It was a waste of time. And look how big assessment has become, right? And the sad thing for faculty, I'm just going to, as a faculty member for 30 some odd years, I mean, we needed to take hold of that sooner and make it ours. We are the educators. That is where our expertise. I do not want this dominated by legal experts. I want this dominated, or administration. I want this dominated by people who understand the educational needs of the student, the educational needs of the community, meeting that. That is our role as faculty. So it's important, I would say, in your first step as New Mexico Highlands, and I think you started, I can see when I went into the websites, the career services folks, my older presentation is up there. But I think if you literally just said, we are going to sit down with folks and have a sub-team like we did, take it back through the faculty, send it back through curriculum, and then send it back through legal. There's no reason, but you do that first. You don't let them, just like they did with us with assessment. I'm sorry, but assessment has now become this external thing that's become bared down on us as teachers, not the other way around. And it's not that I don't agree with assessment. I think it's incredibly important to show the community what we do and how we do it. But when it's who's driving the bus, and we want to be the ones driving the bus because we are the closest to the students. So power to the people there. Power to the people. And again, this is good because, and also I think it puts the faculty on the line between, because often it's the institution is on the front line between that and the employer, right? Where are students going to learn? Where are they going to go? And that in fact, employers see this as a positive. And I'll show you in the second half how we can make this real, but this is incredibly important and nothing has changed in this, okay. This is a famous Furco, and there's several other, Sigmund is another famous author, and Janet Eiler, as well as Joshua Eiler, who I have up a little earlier, and I'll come back to him in just a minute. But this is, when we think about who benefits, this is another major foci in service learning, right? With some programs like internships, often the student gets a smaller benefit, but the agency gets a bigger benefit. With service learning, it tends to lean, it's almost somewhere in the middle. It's not a field experience, it's not an internship, it's not volunteerism. They are both learning. It kind of mediates between those two. They're both learning, but also doing community service. So that's the advantage of proving to the community when we get to assessment that this is exactly at the heart of service learning. I think I emphasize that. So let's ask some things that I think were interesting. Don't forget there are different types of service learning. And one of the things I thought of when I was,
presentation.
yeah, let me just do this from current slide here. There it is. So direct, indirect, research-based, and advocacy.
Thank you.
Direct student service learning, and I give some examples, right? You're giving presentations, you're creating life reviews for hospice patients. This works well in so many things. Then indirect student learning, and actually one of our big initiatives on the campus I've in the last 7 years has been sustainability. We developed a sustainability degree, we have sustainability activities, and one of the most innovative service learning activities was these struggling agencies that are trying, eco agencies, or organizations that are trying to, vermiculture. We had some, what's it called, hydroponics, small startups that are just getting going. And they're, we were working with these agencies to have our students write up, especially in English, literally create promotional material, create technical manuals, which are the kind of things you do in the work world, right? And these are directly linked to student learning outcomes in English. And I thought that was the most innovative, and the students really liked it because they were actually, not only did they have to not be for the full 30 hours on site, but they could go do a site visit. They came back on certain occasions, but we calculated it as 30 hours. Does that make sense? So the idea that you're physically, like volunteerism, I'm going to work in the homeless shelter and I'm going to help out for 30 hours, right? I'm going to clock and we're going to log that information and the faculty is going to respond. No, that the idea that how many hours did it take you, and would we estimate that it would take you to create this brochure for this hydroponics startup. Does that make sense? And I was really excited about that. There's also where you do research. And one of the examples, a colleague of mine who was really instrumental in bringing what we call Mount Recycle More, where we literally piled up all the trash in one quadrant of the college. We call it, yeah, and it was like, this is the trash. And we were looking at what should have been recycled. So she literally, we had folks in hazmat, whatever, and they were pulling out and placing stuff. And then because she's teaching statistics, she actually had them solve for P by looking at which percentage, of this particular trash pile was. So she's doing statistical work, which meant, I thought that was really fascinating. And then advocacy. So 30 hours, which again seems like a lot, a student could certainly do some event planning. Right, so they might set up a particular event. Now, I want to distinguish this between certain, as a colleague of mine in political science said, working for a campaign and getting coffee and making copies is actually pretty useful. This is a pretty traditional practicum for poli-sci students. But that doesn't, for service learning, again, there needs something that links back to your student learning outcomes. So the advocacy event could be something similar if you're doing something for a candidate. This might be something that you would want if you had a political science or a particular cause that the student believed in. Does that make sense? So I think this was really, for me, was because when I really started thinking about service learning, I thought, well, you go and you do the work in 30 hours and then you're done. I think I've emphasized this before, but here's some charting that we did. So, oh, come on. It doesn't like me.
You might have the timer for your presentations.
I know I didn't, but okay.
Is that your timer in it?
You can have a timer. Use timing.
Let's see.
I'll click that one. Use timing.
Oh, yeah. There you go. You have it here.
Right over
You
here?
have it. Click it.
Go away from there.
Go out.
Go away.
Use timing. I'm
Oh,
gonna click.
yeah, there it is.
I'll record it.
And I'm learning too because I didn't know that.
Yeah, I
Now
was
when you say
wondering where that was.
presentation, it should stay in one place.
That happens.
I would think.
That happened to me before.
Sometimes.
I never do that because you never know how long
You
you're
have
going to
those
take.
ideas.
So here's the examples that I just gave you, and we charted these out with the SLOs. So there's the visualization of what I just explained. So again, service learning, typically nonprofit, 30 hours, linked to an SLO. So I thought we would do, and how are we doing on time here? We're coming up to our first hour. I love doing mind mapping. And I have this wonderful new, I'll show it to you if you're interested in downloading and playing. I think one of the things that when I go to conferences and stuff, I always want to learn, new tricks and tips. And so there's a couple others, but MindMeister seemed to be the most colorful if it comes up. You actually can do, a visualization of this, or you can play around with the app if you're interested.
And
So-
if you're really lazy, you can use
It is very lazy. It's recommended. A MindMeister, and it's nice because you can, it almost works like Visio, but it's free.
And it's for organizing your ideas.
And mind mapping. So I thought about this, like if you wanted to take a minute, I would appreciate it if you thought about 3 activities for a particular class that you teach. The question 2 is then how would you ensure this is aligned with the SLO? And I always think about my problem SLOs. Like my students hate theory and I'm always working on how to teach them theory. How do you assess that they've learned? How do you know that your assessment is valid? In other words, it's assessing really what they're learning. But this is just to get you started. So think about a class that you're teaching or you're planning to teach. What type of activities do you think the student could do that would really help them learn without even thinking about agencies yet? Don't go that far. Just think about the activity that would help them learn. Like the forage farmers, of observing the vets in the community, or working statistically manipulating the amount of trash that could have been recycled, or writing up. Go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, I just got one comment. Sometimes with service learning, the opportunities, connected to work is the skill building as well as the content. So for SLOs, think about skills and content.
In some classes, there will actually be true skill sets that they'll need to learn, like in business. In the business, maybe it might be professionalism. So how could they build that? If this helps, I always like taking a minute and doing some being a little reflective as I talk about the importance of self-reflection, which is another big component in service learning. I say dream big. This is the great experience the student will have and it will change their opinion. I really want to major in biology now. This is great. I tied fish for a weekend, 3 weekends. It's great. Let's see if we need other creative things. It's a fun tool, and I've just turned it on. So if you want to text 22333,
Can I share the screen with the folks that are on Zoom really quickly?
certainly. 22333. Is anybody on Zoom?
We've got a couple, well, me. And then there's been a couple people coming in and out. We're going here.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no,
We
here.
can go back to the, go to the, give them the information. I'll go back there. Go back to the screen so they can see. 22333. This is a poll everywhere. We'll do a little word cloud.
I don't understand, sorry. I'm not
Okay,
sure
so you
if
got a phone?
mine is too full today, or I don't know what we are doing.
So go to text. We're gonna create a service learning.
You want us to text something?
22333.
And hit enter.
Mm-hmm.
You just go to your text messaging. So you're going to have start a brand new text, if you don't mind exploring.
No, I need that kind of
Okay.
help.
Yeah, I guess that has to be with a smartphone, right?
I just text whatever.
All good.
And it should come up 22333.
We're going to go here. It says. And then
It should come up. Sometimes technology works, sometimes it doesn't, so you have to wing it. And by the way, one of our digital storyteller service learning, he had his students work with, there's a Native American Comics Association here, and he had them work with one of the artists. Are you getting through, Sarah?
Yeah. So I texted.
And did it come through?
Yeah.
Did you get a text back? And then there's,
Yay!
sorry.
Got it. So
Paula Smith-Hawkins to join. And then what we do is when we make a word cloud, any word that comes to mind about service learning.
How all everywhere.
We'll pull everywhere.
Should we look at that?
if you agree
Okay.
to. No, you don't have to open the link. If you're in to our group, you don't have to click on the link. You just text the words.
For some reason, T-Mobile isn't coming through for me, otherwise I'd show you an example. But what'll happen is, as an instructor, you come up, there it is, woohoo, yay, Sarah. Mine is still thinking about it.
What?
So this app is called Poll Everywhere. And I'm old enough to remember when we were going to introduce clickers. So this is one. I'm going to show you another one called Socrata as well. But this one I thought was fun, and it creates an automatic word cloud. So for example, when I was teaching methods to my students, I did, p-value, standard deviation, and what it'll do, it'll eventually create this image. And it's a great way,
So what
the
is
brain theorists tell us to get to spark.
Why is Sarah do that?
You just text a word on your phone once you're in. Any word that you think of for service.
Word.
Community.
That's a
What is your
big,
word? I don't see.
you won't see my word. You type your own word. We're gonna make a word cloud
Ah.
eventually. We have to gather the words.
We have to gather words, and my phone isn't picking up, believe it or not.
Oh no.
It's going to be a long walk home to Albuquerque when I try to call my ride and say, hey.
Okay, so
I-
what's a good word that we use?
The word that comes after learning what service learning is about in general. What's the thing that you think of? There we go, experience, apply, woohoo!
Okay, now I see collaboration experience.
Oh, okay, there's the words.
There's the words.
Oh, that's great.
What are the words?
Engagement.
Ahí, Jesús en el medio.
And
Collaboration,
We're so
apply.
good.
Stay here, go, go, go.
You can do it. I love that.
well, and the cool thing is that you can save this, and I'm cheap. I'm not going to buy the pay for it, just not, but it's kind of fun to play with, and then I can save this as a screenshot and put it up in the LMS to help spark the students. Right? When you think about the Parnell method of taking notes, right? This is a different way of thinking about. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to send it to Veronica, so you have evidence of what you did.
Thank you, yeah.
And it really, you'll be surprised. You'll come back to these because I have and went, oh yeah, I forgot about that. So this is again, it's called a word cloud, and the system is called Poll Everywhere. I've got one other activity through Poll Everywhere, and it's somewhere up there. Oh, this, I have to give, we're a smaller class than last 2 years when I gave this, but this is a much better word cloud. Can I get a woo? That is nice. I will send this to you, Veronica, when the class is over. But Poll Everywhere, it's a free educational tool. And again, you can save this and put it up in your LMS.
Are you gonna also share the presentation with us?
Pardon?
Are you gonna share the presentation with us?
Okay.
Because having these links and the structure, it can be
Well, and
interesting.
I know everything from the resources, and I've got a few other.
Thank you.
So I have to ask the team, I know this is a Friday afternoon, and I asked Veronica about this. Would you like to just keep going, and if people need to go up and use the restroom or get something to eat, and we keep going? I planned for a larger group and we would take a break. It's up to the team, what you would like. You want to keep going?
We'll have to leave by 3.
So I'll keep going then.
I'm not gonna be able to stay here until 4 for sure. So if we make it faster, it's better for me.
So
But yes, I have to let.
I ask, as I always do, is there anything that's confusing, or do you feel like you can now explain what service learning is?
I'm still toying with the decision because, like I said, there's a whole lot of different terminologies besides service learning. And for me, because I am in humanities/social sciences, we really want to embrace the idea of social justice. Social justice is not just the experience itself. Well, hopefully you're setting in place a trajectory for continuity, and that that it be a world-changing experience that inserts them within ever larger communities and ever larger different kind of projects. So that's beyond the classroom, right? It's beyond the single learning, the service learning objectives. It's really a change in perspective.
But if you're, okay, and I'm just imagining a student learning outcome, right? And I'll use the imagination again. We had advocacy student learning is a great example, right? So at 30 hours. So I would say that volunteerism is if a group of us, and we did, went down and protested a particular episode. You know, we marched on International Women's Day, the Women's March. I participated in that in DC. And
So it's still there. It's still.
it's got a mind of its own. It's
I will agree.
would I count?
Yeah.
Would I count?
And the other, some media control. Well,
Yeah.
that doesn't offense.
If I went down to just protest, would you call that volunteerism or service learning? And by the way, you decide. The faculty should sit down and create. I've given you the rubric, as Blanca says. If you want to, then you create. This is what you think, and then you talk to other people in other disciplines, and so that you have a template, a handbook, if you will, and that's what we ended up creating. This is what we consider an internship. This is what we consider field experience. This is what we consider service learning, and this is what we consider volunteerism. Because I would say that going down and protesting isn't.
You did that, right? Do you see them mutually exclusive?
Pardon?
Do you see them, back to your question, do you see them mutually exclusive?
Volunteerism and service learning?
Well,
Yeah.
It depends on if the student learning objectives and outcomes are linked. If it's linked to the classroom, that's a big factor.
I can give you extra credit for volunteerism. We went down and we marched for Women's Day. We read an article about the march and the history and maybe some controversies. And the students did an exercise in class. Okay, you got a little extra credit. That to me is volunteerism. The idea that you planned the march, you worked with people, you created signs, and there was some effort put into it, and that we had an assignment from the get-go for you to complete. And when you finished, then you did your reflective essay. That to me looks like service learning. And I think I'm going to answer your question here in just a minute too.
In that sense, it's kind of predetermined, you know, ahead of time. There's not a serendipity that you're counting on to happen.
Exactly. So when I register as a student for field experience, I know exactly I'm supposed to, if I'm an educator, I need to register for this class. It's going to cost me X amount of dollars. I get so many student credits, depending on, I think it's 2. And I am expected to do 120 hours in the environment. For service learning, if New Mexico Highlands says, and again, you take this through your curriculum processes, through faculty senate, vetted and faculty senate, and this is what we consider 30 hours is the norm, 26 to about 35. You're doing more than that, that's a little bit more than most students are willing or faculty can manage. Here's the answer I think might help, Eric. How do you transcript it? How does it look? When I register for an internship now in my college, we just passed, you get 1 credit hour, and it means 60 hours of internship. And you're being paid by a private company. I like that. And I like the idea that internships are private and service learning. Not everybody agrees with that, just so you know, before you take this forward to the rest of your community, because this was, I mean, I thought these meetings would be easy. Over 6 months, and believe me, our committee really struggled with this. So what we came up with was an independent credit, and we did it on a small scale. So here you go, as a micro, and you can do this 2 different ways. You can do a 1 credit, which we did. And let me tell you how it works. I'm teaching Introduction to Social. I'm teaching modern social problems. We have an opportunity for our students to work with this agency. Great. I vet the agency simply by doing this 1-page form. This is the director, they take responsibility, blah, blah, blah. The student signs off on it. I walk over to my associate dean, and this was actually the easiest part for me as an associate dean, and I say, please add this credit. In our case, it was a 1096 or however your numbering system. It's hidden from the schedule. Since Blanca's my student, only Blanca sees it. I give you that CRN, that number. You plug it in, you pay for the course, you complete the assignment, and it's a pass-fail. We decided also that service learning was a pass-fail. We didn't want to argue with students. It's just a pass-fail in the, and there are other considerations about that. So I recommend you consider that. So the student does, Blanca goes, she works with the agency, she comes back, she writes a reflective essay. It meets the student learning outcome, we out, right? It was managed by faculty, and the student, I hang on as the faculty member to the documentation, the reflective essay, the original signature. My dean is aware of it. At the end of the year, we get rid of it. The other example was, it appears, when I think of plus labs, I think of biology, right? I've got the lecture and the lab. But I add the service learning, and it's transparent in the catalog. You can register for SOC 1101, or you can register for SOC 1101 plus service learning. And I know this sounds picayune, but it's actually a big deal in the mechanics of how students come to this. Because if I do the first one, this is me. Hey, students, are you interested in doing this? Hey, Sarah, maybe you'd be interested in doing this. Hey, on the other hand, this one, where it's there as a plus, we're going to have much more broader participation. And I may need more support. Largely, I would say, if you go with a more visible curricular presence of your service learning class, make sure that you've got broad department understanding and resources in the department to hold the data. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Now that means anytime you add more layers, you get less nimble, just so you know. Because the next version this is interesting. This is called embedded. And the example, we had a very strong a person that came out of our medical programs. And this was literally, you had to, if you wanted to pass class X, you had to do a service learning component. And again, this is our surgical tech. She required them. She had it all set up. And it was implicit. It's not transparent in the schedule at all, but it's explicit in the master syllabi. Just like my faculty who got reamed because, I wasn't told that when I took an appreciation of theater or appreciation of music class that I had to go to a live professional production. Sorry, that's part of what we would expect in that class. Does that make sense? The faculty and the department then have to agree, and they might even share assignments. Is this clear? And then, go ahead, Sarah.
So I'm really appreciating you presenting this, because when we worked in the group, there was a group of us who did service learning, and we were thinking of how we would present this to Senate. And there was a lot of debate, because I think most of us were doing embedded, and it's a lot to ask for students. And so you present it a different way. The one thing to me is if it's the independent credit, we could do it as a instructor permission only, so that students can see it's there, and then we help them enroll. But I love that it could be on their transcript. It actually says.
That's what we wanted. We wanted it transcripted. Go ahead.
Because so many of the classes, science classes, have a laboratory, so this is kind of somewhat parallel to lab. Is it easy for you to add a lab experience to some of the classes?
Yeah.
Without having to go through academic affairs?
I think it would have to be modified or revised, right?
Yeah. I don't want Jesus to have a PTSD moment, but I have been through curricular arguments where we have, you register for the biology lab and then you register for the lecture, right? And sometimes then the students don't do it and they need both, and do we require them to take both together, etc. So again, the first one is almost literally is only transparent to the student and the faculty, and then it'll show up on their transcript. The other thing is, if you're paying for credit, you do have some skin in the game as a student. Forgive me. There's income for the college, and let's just be honest, absolutely that is a consideration. It's also something we can show much easier to external partners, but this one is nice. And what struck me, Eric, was that people were so hesitant. Oh, I'm bugging the dean because I'm asking them to put a class on the schedule. This is actually one of the easiest things I did. Click, 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 send, boom, magically this CRN appears and Blanca can register. Only Blanca can see it. And if somebody else registered, I'm looking at it going, wait a minute, how come there's 3 students? I only registered one of them. We kick them out. It's easy. I call the registrar and they kick them out because somehow they stumbled into the wrong class. But if you put it on the schedule here, and keep in mind, this is then also linked to a faculty member. The issue is that this one is a much more nimble process. Eric can do what he wants to do, work. And if he says, listen, you know, this semester, there just aren't as many opportunities. Or we're doing something else. For example, or this one we're very specific because we don't want to do it in the fall because in the spring I'm trying to encourage students we're going on a study abroad experience. We had a group of students who went to Ireland and actually had some opportunity to work with some social service agencies. So they got their service learning experience abroad, which I thought was really cool. So I don't want you to do it in the fall. I do not want you to participate. Let's move it to the spring where I'm encouraging you to engage and really consider this study abroad experience. And we're going over the spring break and we'll be doing this, which is really cool.
I'm not sure if my question is for you or for them. So for us, these are Highlands offering a credit for an extra activity will be like a graduate study or what?
I'm thinking we would create a new, so I do service learning intro bio, so I was thinking if there was a 1 credit introductory biology service learning and it's generic, so we could attach it on to any intro class, and then maybe you have senior service learning or ecology service, whatever.
Yeah, but at least we will create elective credits. Otherwise, it would change the number.
Blanca, what we did is we created a unique, it was our generic code. We created a generic, I think it was like a 1099. And it, you know, SOCI, history, humanities, bio, if it was forestry, and that's you just tack on and it's identified as service learning. Or the opposite, we've seen other institutions just create an SERV, 1099, 1 credit. It says SERV, just, and you can stick it on anything and it's just an addition.
Like our 490, 492, 499, our
How-
independent studies.
How
research.
does it count toward your teaching level? Does it count?
Toward the teaching or towards the degree?
Toward your teaching level?
Oh, I love this group. You guys I love it. Yeah, that was
If I put it
the,
from 499, that counts toward my teaching level.
well, and here was the thing. We had a detente, right? Because if I'm only teaching 1 student, am I really gonna, they're not gonna, in this decision wasn't, we weren't gonna pay. But if I had more than 15, yeah. So we said, once you got to a certain number of students, and it was actually our target for a half full class, then we would pay you the 1 credit. And I also, absolutely, please, I'm glad because, you know, we had our full-time faculty, how much does that count toward my load? If I'm an adjunct or part-time faculty and I'm being paid, you know, and granted, there's an incentive then for me to hustle and get, you know.
We have independent research, independent study that are kind of a flexible thing. Whatever you're doing with a student, working with them independently, it counts that, and that counts somewhat towards the teaching. So we could spin those towards active learning. That's all beautiful because it meets students' needs and doesn't screw up the faculty. So far, we don't give them a title. So this independent study, independent research, that is the title. Doesn't say.
Independent research is interesting because I've seen it. The best practice I've seen is, listen, this is only a full-time faculty member. We're not paying you. It may never replace a regular course. It is, I've got a bright student, and I'm sorry, we didn't introduce Carol. Carol and I decided to work together. I work with her because she's, I'm really excited. And as a student, this is a high impact activity, by the way. And it is truly shows as a researcher, you absolutely, I wouldn't count this as a student. I want to show as research because more likely I'm trying to go to graduate school. And that we work on, say, a publishable paper. And it is never, we don't get that because what does the faculty member get out of it? They get a publishable paper too, right? They're the lead author. Which goes towards your tenure file or portfolio, or you get what I'm saying? So I don't know what the nuances are, but I would say I'm not, absolutely not. Unless you hit a, like for example, with Eric, I said you're taking a team and saying you're going to Ireland and you're working and you know you've got 15 students, then that faculty member gets paid because you're managing that student.
Tell us about your second classes when you get the Panagas exercise. I think that was a good one.
It's more of the community service, the volunteerism, because again, there's different levels. We have our students go commit to a civic engagement project that they're involved in. They're cleaning the acequia pathways, et cetera, et cetera. But the second level of activity with that is that they involve themselves either with a land grant, a reservation, or an acequia community and help determine where are they at within their governance structures, do they have bylaws, et cetera. So there's kind of a political advocacy component that goes along with that.
So I think that hits a lot of those that you have.
Yeah, but I want to do a study abroad. I want to type a study
You got
abroad.
really excited about it.
Yeah, not all of us get to go do anaconda study in Venezuela.
Or over the, let me give you another example though. Don't forget that traditionally in many institutions just did a unique certificate. Okay, and again, you need to come with something that carries weight, that, you know, not just something printed on your local printer. You want something, you know, coming out of the business office or the registrar's office that looks good. But I also wanted to suggest something else.
No. Can I ask something on
Okay,
the unique certificate aspect? Because while you're talking about this, I'm thinking this is in line with the big mission of the university. In fact, right now, there's, as we're speaking, there's a committee in place that, in alignment with HLC accreditation, we have to demonstrate, you know, kind of where our community involvement is, but it's not clear as to where it is, et cetera, et cetera. And there's not a rubric or some kind of indicator of what that means, et cetera. But ideally, it ties in with overall strategic planning of the university. And right now, I'm hoping everybody did respond to that survey monkey asking for you to contribute to the discussion on strategic planning, because there's an element in there on community involvement and civic engagement.
Hold that thought, because that's my section 3.
Okay.
That's my section 3. And
Because it's community building, right? It's
this is
community
absolutely, and that service learning is community engagement and student learning. That's where the two meet. Volunteerism over here, doing an internship where it's mostly about, you know, the business. But service learning is community engagement or civic engagement, and
that's why this second thing that he was telling me.
in fact,
multi-community is the many depth of this.
Well, with the high end, and this is where I think, you know, I'm looking at, you know, the collaboration with career services, because it's creating job opportunity. If not identifying where there's potential for employment, it's actually creating these conversations within agencies that they may go those directions of creating opportunity, employment opportunities in these areas where our students are invested. And
don't forget though, any of these
development that we're promoters, we're catalysts within our accompanying communities in developing opportunity based on learning.
And don't forget, I mean, if I were in your boots right now, that's why I would spend a lot of time up front defining. This is for private companies. This is for startups. This is only for community. And you've got plenty. I actually looked and I thought, you know, students at New Mexico Highlands, where would they go to find service learning opportunities? There's plenty here in the community. They could work with agencies in Santa Fe and Albuquerque. They could go statewide because of technology. But I would say make sure, you know, as you say, that any of this would demonstrate that and meet that for you. But here's something to think about. University of Kentucky did this. I thought this was just mind-blowing. And this is what's different about the presentation I gave 2 years ago, is digital badges. And the badge is, you could do the digital badge, like Kentucky is the blue badge, because it shows engagement in the community around the University of Kentucky. New Mexico Highlands, because you call it purple? The purple badge, right? You earn the purple badge, a digital badge, by doing this. So the service learning ties to a student learning outcome, or maybe even in this case, a program level outcome. And for them, it's the same thing. Now their accreditation, I think, is by middle states. But HLC is saying the same thing. You create a badge. It's very fourth industrial revolution. You know, they've got something they can take with them. CNM is really doing some innovative stuff. We're actually doing these badges in blockchain. But Sarah, I'm always worried about this kind of thing. Before you say, this is what we're going to do, buy coffee, get the registrar and the team sitting, because that, there was support for blockchain degree verification before we got to this. Are there IT resources? How can we do this within the LMS? Because that's how the student can print their certificate themselves.
What is LMS?
A learning management system. So we use Blackboard, we're moving to Brightspace, Canvas. I'm sorry about that. Use a little, and many times, actually, this is the kind of thing that I would go after some grant resources for this, because this is exciting. And you could do the same thing. You could have a badge for internships. You could really think about badges are a fourth industrial revolution approach to credentialing that isn't necessarily, credit or you get a certificate.
Yeah, I guess I was trying to understand the difference between the badge and their certificate.
And the badge, again, it's transcripted. So you've got to work with your registrar, whereas the certificate is just, this is a nice, you're participating.
But here our certificates are on the transcripts, right? Like the GIS certificate. So then I was just wondering.
So it's like
Service learning will be another certificate.
Well, that might be another direction of being able to work with clubs and organizations, because even though it's not a recognized criteria, many of our clubs and student clubs and organizations, they have a volunteer requirement, but it's really not assessed or it's more volunteerism as opposed to really tying it into service learning. So clubs and organizations could actually go this direction as well as doing a recognition and more substantive involvement.
A volunteerism
with some
badge.
recognition, yeah.
And you need parameters, how is it done? Who's, the process, everything from following student code of conduct to how many hours do we expect? We don't want a situation where Paula does 2 hours and you do 20. We get the same badge. Go ahead.
So this could be a continuing education thing for badges.
You could market it to graduates.
Yeah.
Because what we're looking at right now from a grant from the Lumina Foundation was badges like for critical thinking, communication, collaboration. Because our employers are saying, forgive me, University of New Mexico paid $15,000 to bring in George Koo, who's a monster in my field, right? And you know what he told us? You know what they want you to major in? They want majors showing up on time. I'm serious. I'm like, oh my God. So if you've got a professionalism badge and you have activities, and we have, I just am working on the critical thinking badge, and of course it's not quite developed, so I'm even frustrated. And, how do you make this work in a way that is demonstrable so that the student gets a certificate, and in a way that they can produce it electronically? Because if I go to, like we used to at a C&M or in Arizona, you got this nice piece of paper and you put it in a notebook, and then you could show it to an employer when you handed them your resume. You don't do that anymore. I need something I can upload to LinkedIn.
And that comes back to the American Association of College Elite Program. Again, those learning objectives are inserted within our core curriculum, and our syllabi is supposed to be represented, our pedagogy is supposed to support it, et cetera. But the students, for the better part, they might be going through a whole class without recognizing they have to demonstrate communication, critical thinking, reasoning ability, their quantitative analysis, and that for that civic engagement. If we do the digital badges, then that's kind of suggesting that there be service learning project in all of the core, because there's alignment between that alignment within the core, the learning objectives that are core could be demonstrated by means of these digital badges, and it supports service.
Because the plan is for me to put my critical thinking badge option for students in my sociology classes. My critical thinking.
Had the registrar include, that may be something to discuss when I include participation in clubs, textbooks.
I'm sorry,
I think the co-curricular issue that we're having, that there isn't good integration with co-curricular activity and academic activities and badges.
Maybe that is something that will bring them together, is that participation in a club for very many years, something that can be aligned in the transcript when the person graduates.
I would say keep the lines clean. Volunteerism, I'm in a club, and that's absolutely legitimate and something that you would share with your accreditors. And service learning, because service learning has to be tied to a student learning outcome in that course that should feed into that program, that should feed into the overall university goals. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but recognize there's an organizational function, the Society for Leadership and leadership and
Nice.
Service? Leadership.
leadership and service, is that what it is? And in my familiarity is basically they earn badges of recognition such, but it's by participation in different kind of digital training activities. So they award them and they advance accordingly. It's almost like the brownies that you could build badges along the way, and that when you're finished, you have a whole series of different capacities that you demonstrate, but they're doing it by means of video presentations and training activities.
Ours is Illumina Foundation, and we create, first of all, the faculty professional development. You have to do that. Then you do the badge yourself, and then you embed it in your course. So the student can, it's like getting a little bonus that you can prove. Go ahead, Sarah.
I was going to say, I was looking, because I wanted to know more, I was looking at Forbes, and Forbes saying, this is how you link student education to their workforce skills.
Although every now and then with Forbes, but I think it's a way of having students demonstrate, like for example, in a sociology class, it would be very esoteric, it can be, right? A lot of heavy theory and stuff, but this is a skill set that I can show. It might even be digital badges for certain types. I can write in Python. I can do Adobe. I also would say, Eric, you sparked something. C&M also was engaged in what we call a DACM. Ohio State created this outreach where we could get together with businesses and communities where our students are going, where are we feeding our graduates, and actually get them to talk about what curricular needs they had in our graduates. And it was really powerful because we had a couple episodes where they said, we don't use that language anymore. So if you're interested, I certainly can connect you with those folks but it's the DACM program. And again, it's literally developing curriculum by creating conversations between the faculty, the administration in an organization, and the feeder, I would say, who you're feeding your graduates to, like in your case, which agencies are, what do they need from us? And sometimes they're natural. Those advisory boards already exist, but doing a more in-depth course by course, much more granular. Does that help?
Yeah, well, that actually parallels again the lead literature, their global learning for 21st century. Lumina Foundation has what they call their DQP, which is Degree Qualifications Profile. Howard Gardner speaks about 5 mindsets for the future. And it's in alignment with our State Department, Higher Education Department learning objectives. And it's saying employers want showing up on time, critical thinking, communication, et cetera, but they also want content knowledge. So it isn't just throw out the content of the major and minor altogether and emphasize soft skills, academic and learning and professional skills. But that unique combination of how it shows up in individuals. But what I'm saying is we're weak in our core curriculum is demonstrating these are not only viable skills that tie into marketability, but it's foundational for you to be able to achieve when you determine major and minor. And the service learning could really make that available and visible to them because it's articulation with real employment in the real world of saying, this is what we need from you.
And I have a funny story. I came from a contract in the UAE, and all of the students are 3 major public institutions, and I worked for one of them. You cannot graduate without doing 30 hours of community service, they called it. It looked like. And the funny thing, it was very much the embedded option. And because we didn't have a handle on it, I think, at least it was housed in student affairs, which is a different, much more like the embedded certificate as often, the unique certificate, right? It's housed somewhere else, and they handled it, but yet it was a graduation requirement. So is it God is in the details or the devil's in the detail? And so we had students do everything from, going to work for their uncle, which really wasn't, to students who were doing, the Sharjah Book Fair is one of the biggest in the world, thousands and thousands and thousands. And they actually managed, displays and put things together. It was just phenomenal. And what they could show then to employers. So I think you're right. And for me, the challenges are in how we structure this so we report out. So we want to make sure we've got strong definitions. We want to make sure we have strong registration structures, right? Whatever they are. And then, we're comfortable with the limitations of each, right? Because this is, if I do it, like I gave the example with Blanca, right? I register for a course, it gives me a unique CRN and it's just between us. Or if we're a department and it's a plus, right? It's faculty-led and managed, it's flexible. It's not easily tied to the degree. That's a little tougher, right? Because the fact is that I might do the service learning, but the next student might not. So I'm not necessarily requiring this. It's easy to transcript, right? There's some faculty resources, but the faculty is responsible, right? This is easiest. But then my question would be, as you said, how are we going to report this out to the HLC? On the other hand, if we embed it, right, it's department-led. So now we've got people, there's less flexibility, notice no autonomy, it's tied to the degree, it's transcripted, it requires department resources, and now the department resources have to be used to that. Do we have the resources to do that? On this side, it's all staff. And I warn you, I mean, about just as an institution about, just don't go to a staff member and go, okay, now this is on your plate. This really should come from faculty first. If you decide to let the staff manage it and they vet for you, this is the fretting for me, the vetting and the fretting, right? They do the work, the hard work, they'll do the visitation. That's actually kind of exciting. Kind of a fun part of the job. So, do you need me to close the blinds or, oh, they are getting nailed there.
And what about the degree? The degree, I can understand that some people like it better than another, but once you do it, not the surveys.
Yeah.
I mean, would you fail a person who is in humanities?
Actually, in higher colleges of technology, we had a number of students who did not graduate. And they were trying to tell me that this was unique to have somebody, you know, Abdul's mother sitting in front of me going, we, you know, and I'm like, you don't have to translate. I know what she's saying. How come you didn't tell us about this? How come, you know, how come he's supposed to graduate? We got a job for him and he can't get the job and he won't get paid. And you can almost, you know, I don't need to speak Arabic to understand. And it was, you know, the same type of problem. So when we say this is a graduation requirement, be very careful that the student is doing it as we go. One of the things we were able to do is we said, okay, the student needs 75 hours of community service. We broke it up and said, you cannot move from one level to the next. And we spent a lot of energy over the summers trying to get students to do it, which was interesting because everybody leaves in the summer because it's too hot. But anyway, but
Really?
yeah. So when do they do this? And that, you know, timing is everything, right? In love and theater and comedy. So where in the curriculum do we want them to do their have their civic experience? And our feeling was we wanted them, speaking of a different Gardner, John Gardner, right, the first year experience, we wanted them to start within the first year. Preferably the second semester when they got oriented. Is this helpful? Yeah. Okay. So I wanted you to think about, and it sounds like we already are doing this, I think pair square is where you think individually. This is Cross and D'Angelo, a classroom assessment I took. You think individually, then the two of you get together and say, okay, these are the things that I think are strengths and weaknesses, and then we report out as a group. Would you like to do the activity?
Squares.
You want to do the activity? Because it's kind of useful. So what are the strengths and weaknesses for this institution? So I'm not asking you in general. I'm saying for your department, for your division, what are the strengths and weaknesses of each of these approaches? So think for just a minute or two, make some notes.
You are right.
I have a pen.
Okay.
I want. Uno sola o dos para aparte.
I do not like it. I do not like it.
Veronica and Carol, you guys okay with the pair? And I'll leave the.
I have a
No, son de acuerdo. Es que bueno, es que porque es
Oh, this is I'm not doing separate.
todo un rango de proyectos y todo eso, pero de la manera que tenga enfoque más bien en cuanto a la licenciatura, que es otra cosa, es que podemos avanzar y promover a que todos los estudiantes de municipios que están allá, pero es que bueno, y eso es lo que pasa, es que ahorita que lo están explicando.
Which one would you like to
Parece
see?
que es que
The next one.
quiere estar educado en una clase, ¿cierto?
Oh, okay.
Que los
Okay.
diferentes
Strengths and
proyectos,
weaknesses.
o digamos a los
Titulares
diferentes
abajo.
niveles,
So,
que
strengths
fuera
and weaknesses.
más
Jesus,
trabajo
for your department, for your,
también entre los
what would be
años.
the strengths and weaknesses for your department, you know? If you've had movement in chairs, for example, then this would, and that it might be a weakness. Like if you had chairs changed quite a bit, if you have a chair who's been there for a long time or kind of continuity in the chair, that might be a strength then.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Ahorita yo tengo va muy bien porque es que yo les doy la base en cuanto a la cultura y historia y luego yo soy en cuanto a este enfoque de la comunidad, desarrollo comunitario.
You read that.
The social
And that's what I've been
no es buena Hay muy poco social, hay muy poca facultad de social que existe ya. Son como 4 o 5 los demás están allá. Pero es buena onda. Y es que ellos tienen enfoque en cuantos social labor, service learning, social justice, y yo eso por mi parte es pero el nivel de los participantes de primer año es que son muy inmaduros, muy inmaduros en cuanto a eso. Pero si es que podemos por lo menos introducir el concepto de otra organización, quizás no al nivel de los 30 horas, pero desde las clases participantes lo patriótico, ¿no? Y luego segundo año, tercer año, cuarto año. Ya para el cuarto año es que ya tienen madurez, pero ya están enfocados, bien capacitados, adiestrados, que lo pudieran trabajar como una investigación de campo. Entonces, de la manera de tenerlo independiente.
Tú lo consideras, tú tienes tu autonomía.
No, lo mío es independiente. No digo en ver, porque es parte del currículum, pero es que no los pido 30 horas, no lo tengo muy exclusivamente, es la de horas que dedicar, es que lo presento como un proyecto, es la información que traía.
Es un curso de Dynamic Community.
Es lo que pasa con...
Yo lo tengo, por ejemplo, en Professional Ecology, claro, en Professional Ecology. Y vamos a ver, y algunas veces hacemos aquí.
Sí, pero ese proyecto es más por allá del curso. Ellos
Claro, yo solo
los desarrollo en cuanto, digamos, una investigación que se puede.
El proyecto es de Mora. ¿Qué están haciendo? Mirar porque los estudiantes participan en parte de sus estudios. Pero claro, no es el estudio de los estudiantes, es el estudio de Río Mora, de los que está allí.
Are you ready to report out?
Es que viene siendo más bien voluntario, están contribuyendo al proyecto, digamos, los objetivos. Y eso, entonces es que no lo pueden demandar a través de un currículum y decir, mira, yo llegué a cabo de esto.
My theater instructor taught me to. Welcome back. So, because it's a small enough group, we can't make more than a square and a half. What are the strengths and weaknesses of each modality for you? What do you think is the best right now? If you're just from, what is the strength for this team?
The best option?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we liked 1 and 3. I like the flexibility of option 1, but it's still on the transcript. But I think the option 3 is more about more comprehensive program. I don't know. It's more useful to students going into, whether it's a certificate or a badge, connecting to
the workforce. Okay.
To some degree, it wasn't so much the comparison of which one would be most viable for us. We were talking about, again, this idea of scaffolding activity. If we start them off in a freshman year, introduction, second year, advanced, third year, etc.
Yeah, because the
Fourth year,
maturity of the
action
students
research
change.
with publication and conference presentation. Really, but that would certainly be institutional. It would be independent. The badge might tie in with it, but it really requires a lot of interdisciplinarity,
That's
and
very-
particularly within the department faculty, that they're going to recognize that the introductory level class, the survey course, they get an introduction, the 200 level, 300 advanced. There has to be a significant collaboration between faculty for them to recognize each other's faculty members' work.
And that's very much more like option, the second part A in the first modality, that it's going to be transparent in the curriculum. You're going to look in the catalog, it's going to be there, and they must work through it.
And even more if you need collaborations among different courses or different disciplines. That is.
Yeah, and that's a lot of work across the curriculum committees and the faculty senate, and so Jesus and Veronica, what were you thinking?
Well, I was kind of, because I'm in the hall, I was kind of, didn't let her talk much. But I was thinking, in the second part.
There we go.
Degree.
Thank you.
I hate to sit the whole time, but it seems to work. Go ahead.
Time to degree. In biology, so we only have a capstone course in biology. What all students need to do it, and they need to do this final wrapping up the knowledge before they graduate.
Absolutely.
And when we look at all the people who know stuff, they said that it's good to have two capstones, one after these first 2 years and one at the end.
George.
Whenever I wrestled with that idea, I encountered that after the first 2 years, students do not really have a lot of depth of knowledge to do a scientific research-based capstone, but it would be beautiful to put a service learning capstone at the end of the second year. And that, because that's the one thing that is kind of missing of all the advices, the one thing we had not incorporated is that one, but we could do a 295 or something. We could create a class that all the students need to take at the end of the second year, and that would be a nice way to do that and promote engagement and stuff.
It's brilliant. I really like that.
Actually, if I could just comment on that. So we have our university studies program. I've been working with that for 14, 15 years. And right now it serves as an exit strategy for most students that for one reason or another, they're not finishing and they need a viable option to be able to finish.
Yeah. Portland
State University and a lot of the other universities that have been real key in working with university studies, they're going with that kind of scaffolding model of saying, yeah, this, there's a first year, at least introduce kind of what we were talking about in saying that there's scaffolded activity. They're finalizing, like you said, with at least some familiarity with the practicality of doing research, but doing research as a capstone project. And as you're, but they're very much interdisciplinary. It doesn't have to be anchored within the discipline itself. If there's some kind of coordination office or placement somewhere else, a service learning office is to say in that bigger sense, they could facilitate that. There's a parallel kind of project within different disciplines. So if you have a student that's coming from another area of STEM and that they're going to finalize with you, because again, second year, they may not have determined their major or minor yet, but if they could still have some kind of service learning or introductory research experience, by the time they come to you for a major or a minor,
could we tie that service learning software with that DEI course activity? Diversity, exclusion, and inclusion. So part of the service learning, because we're in New Mexico, might involve understanding issues of diversity and inclusion. And that we could do something cross-curricular that all the students need to do. The only concern that I have is that it might be too big if everyone has to take the same.
Yeah, who are gonna take that?
Or we can coordinate a variety.
And I want to, you're hitting something that I think is crucial. One of the advantage, you get two things going here, and people talk about staff, and it's really with Sarah and Carol, if they're thinking they like the badges, they like the certificate, you need resources for staff. And you can't just go to a staff member and go, okay, now you're going to do this, because the successful service learning that is done with badges and certificates and staff is people who really believe in it. So it's not surprising it comes out of student affairs, right? Because these people really are engaged with students. If you're saying you need to do this, what gates are you going to create for students? So if I don't do my service learning, for example, by the time I'm done with my sophomore year, am I not allowed to register?
Mm.
So be careful with it, because we don't want, and I would be very careful too about, if you see these as tiered opportunities, or do you see this as we want to prepare you for the end result? Because what you're also moving in is you're conflating research service learning, which is a type of service learning, it's not the only one, with what you want in the capstone, which we have the same thing. You must do, to make sure that they're familiar with all the theories, to make sure that they have the skill set so they can go on. Hopefully many of our students go on to graduate school in social sciences. But is that what you're thinking? Because then that's a slightly different track. Does that make sense?
Sure, but I didn't have a thought formulated in my mind. I was kind of thinking about that. When we were talking with the Council of Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion, one of the things that we identified is that we don't have any curricular, even though the university practices diversity, inclusion in hiring and what have you. We don't teach that to our students. So you are taking a class, with Eric, you learn in his classes, but there isn't anything cross-cultural, common, required or at least available for all the departments. Something that we could brainstorm, maybe start with one program and then maybe see if it sticks with the others, will be to have some capstone, second year capstone course that includes some service learning, but also tied in with diversity, equality, and inclusion activities.
Because starting with that, it will be, I agree with you, it will be easier.
Because the students are education, the university is required to do it, and there's a faculty who has released to do that has, is counting, that has his job is to do that. So we overcome a lot of the barriers. Who does that? If that is part of this thing that we
if it's your college service that you're pushing us, you really want somebody to believe in it.
See, Paula, part of why Jesus is mentioning this is because right now we're pushing that we have a diversity course that's included within our core. We don't have one, as you mentioned, it's out there floating around that it's a core value, but it's not internalized and structured. Yeah. So we're working with developing a course that all students would have to take. So again, that's a captive audience.
Yeah, like all students has to take a course in Spanish, no matter the discipline, right? And that is why, or part of that requirement is because we are a Spanish serving institution, but finally we only focus in the language instead of the culture of the society that maybe is more important. I'm not sure now.
But it's provocative to think that, okay, that this is in your sophomore year, you do a service learning activity that is culturally related. I would also say be very careful. I've been at this a long time. The last thing you want is which was very token. Like, here's your take. UNM looked at this, right? Just do this course and therefore you've done it. Not necessarily. That's not how social justice works. And it reminds me of the old Dave Barry joke. And women and minorities were making important contributions at this time. And it's always the last sentence. Like, it's not an add-on. It needs to be in your curriculum in a meaningful way. And women and minorities are making important. It's the last sentence of each chapter.
That is why we want to be as a.
It's not, if you want diversity, and the nice thing about service learning is it can meet that need, but what I would say, you're doing it the wrong direction. What is your student learning outcomes? Where are your student learning outcomes? And are you saying the diversity outcome exists only at the department level or only at the university level? Then you need to go back and look at, it sounds like, okay, sure, it would be humanities, but I would say, hey, wait a minute, forestry and biology. If I am studying in New Mexico and I am not appreciative of the uniqueness of New Mexico's ecological, geographical, topographical, if I'm not appreciative of that, that may be a problem for my graduates. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that would be, I would go back and say, make sure that we're looking at our student learning outcomes, because maybe this is an opportunity to go back through. It starts at the top, but it should be.
Yeah, I'm trying to get more specific. I hear you about the fear of the tokenism, but and that is why I don't want to create a curse about diversity inclusion, because it can easily just like that. But if it is tied to service learning, I can imagine that becoming tokenic, because they are doing something with their hands and feet. They're cleaning an acequia, or they're doing some practical.
Which is very much.
How do you make that tokenic? That can be tokenic.
I mean, we call that a double tap. You get both.
To keep tokenism away is to include this diversity stuff with some service learning, because that would make it very heartfelt and very real.
And as Sarah said too, if you're thinking, well, we do this in one central location where people would go for service learning, and you get continuity that way, then that would be easier to enforce than if service learning is diffuse as it is in mode 1. Does that make sense? Because you've got a cross-university buy-in, this is where you go. This office, this group of people are the experts on service learning, and they help us. Then that might be better. But think backwards, make sure the student learning outcome is first, and then you match. And I love the SAP as example. I think that's a primary, but you'd probably need several options for students.
Right, the same guy with Robert Chiu, the genus watershed.
But if I have a disability, I'm not going to be able to do that. Is there another opportunity for me?
You can do a GIS interpretation of blah blah blah. We can come up with something that's not necessarily physical.
Well, this is great, but remember to start with the service line.
No,
I love this.
I hear you. We're gonna try to cook that in biology a little better in the next year or so.
So I'm set for another break. If you want something to eat or drink or need to make a restroom stop, and I've got one other little game, and actually it's a little self-quiz. This is another system that I've worked with. It's called Socrata, and like Socrates.com. So it's a little easier to log into Socrative.com. And the password's a little easier. And there's a little quiz going. Let me get this quiz up and running. So for example, the first question I ask is, service learning typically involves community organizations, true or false? Again, Socrative, and the login is Paula 1027. And again, this is free. I'm cheap, so I like free, fun tech.
Thank you for being cheap for us. Because otherwise
I'm not paying for it. I have enough tech money. I'm even digging my heels and buying a new phone. And I found this a little easier to use than Poll Everywhere. It's a little bit more, I don't know, it's just prettier. I think I asked you 5 questions.
Yeah. You just do login and then student.
So what is the
There you go.
Paula 1.
It's right up here. Socrative.com.
And now we log in or we look for you?
Your password, it should be the student login, and it'll be Paula 1027. The teacher login or the student login.
True or false?
login?
A ver,
And what do I type in? Paula?
teacher or student, Paula? A student? Student login?
Login as a student, yes.
Thank you.
Room name?
Although the room name is Paula with caps, Paula 1027.
Thank you. This is a wonderful.
I figure if you take nothing away, you go, oh, I got some new toys to play with.
Yeah.
And this is, I do this sometimes instead of an entrance ticket for students, or if I know there's a lull between topics, and The only thing is, one of my students pointed out, she's like, well, you know, can we have these to study for the exam? And I haven't found a way to, unless you pay, but I think you can do screen captures.
We are doing something, you don't want to collaborate?
No, I did cancel my 3 o'clock.
See, here's the results table. So I can cheat, you can see where you're at.
Es que yo lo cancelé porque quiero continuar con esta discusión. No, es que ya no aparezco.
Can I get anybody anything to eat or drink?
¿En cuánto estamos? El messaging. No, todo el tiempo.
Si no se llaman escuelas.
No, es que muchas veces es que últimamente inclusive gente que están dando en estas oportunidades, ellos pagan para estar allá porque ya son valiosos. No los pagan. O hay abuso.
See, and then you can show the class if you're interested. Or you just click the number.
Sometimes.
No hay control en cuanto a...
Hint, hint, hint on question 5, modality.
Eso me chularía.
Modality.
Hay un tipo de abuso.
And I set this up and cranked out about 6 quizzes in about 20 minutes. So it's really nice for, and I don't know if you're, I just have decided I'm going to make them use their phones in class. And yes, I actually had a group of students a couple semesters ago who said, we don't want to hear their phone in class.
That's fine.
Yeah, you need to check and see, did mom text? Okay, but while I'm here.
There's such positive associations with our phones too.
Eso es lo que dice.
Pardon?
There's such positive associations.
Which of the following types of
Exactly.
Exactly.
And some of them, go on to use it. I've had students who say, I'm not using this at work because I got to do something. So anyway, service learning typically involves community organizations. Yes, I strongly encourage you, as you do that first step for definitions, is make sure that you distinguish between who works, which is public, which is paid, in paid. In some cases, an internship is only paid. It's a cooperative. What does that mean? And talk across the university, talk across the colleges within the university, because you want to make sure that there's some consistency. And I'm sure, for example, Blanca, your organizations, your professional organizations have some concept of what an apprenticeship is, and which might be different than education, that might be different from medicine. And that way everybody's speaking the same language. This one, student internships are rarely paid. Actually, they're often paid. So
False, because I thought that they are paid, otherwise they are volunteer.
That's correct. That's the correct answer. Okay, the internships have been associated with some controversy. I think you got it, right? They're abused, there's inappropriate, and again, from a faculty perspective and from an administrative perspective, you always think of the student first. And you don't want the student taken advantage of. From an industry perspective, you don't want a situation where people are taking jobs away from what should be a full-time paid employee. Which of the following are certain levels? I think you guys got this one right. Those all of the above. The different modalities, remember, you could offer it as different ways of offering service learning, right? Direct, you could do unique, there's the badges, you can link it. So these are the ways. So hopefully you enjoyed the little Socrata quiz. Let's go. Yeah. Let's move on. This is another example. Socrata.com. Easy to use. The students love it. And I think I have less trouble. Pull Everywhere does more, but it's more vulnerable to snafus. This is a lovely example, and I give you another one with Lisa Knudsen. One of our composition students had her students get together, and there was an immigration advocacy group, and she's an immigrant herself and teaches English, is an amazing instructor, and she literally, they had a t-shirt designing contest with logos, and so she was able to teach some of her student learning outcome about rhetoric and meaning and audience, and they wound up raising money and giving the t-shirts to, and they did interviews. It was pretty amazing. So she had a large group, and that's Jesus' question about, if I have 15 or more students, what should happen? So this third section, when I originally was asked to do this by the School of Education, they had a series of traits. Then going back, I think you know that New Mexico Highlands has a new strategic plan. And to give you some love, Eric, which is the LEAP project, right? So you're up to your elbows in the AACU. And we've had these LEAP outcomes for 15 years. I mean, pretty much they were coming out when I was finishing my doctorate. So a long time ago. And the good news, and I think you should give yourself some love. I wanted to give New Mexico Highlands University, because you're on track. I think what you might want to do as a university or whatever as a team is do some crosswalking between these traits, and you'll recognize them, right? This is diversity, which you were just mentioning, right? How you create opportunities, what are your criteria? And the joy of saying with service learning, it's community-based, you're going to protect yourself in ways that you're not going to if you have students do service learning with private corporations. Or even startups, as much as I believe in that, I think there's some challenges. This was another leadership, and I think this is probably another LEAP. You'll recognize this as well. How do we create leadership opportunities within service learning? Again, we don't want them just getting coffee. Might be appropriate if I'm a poli-sci major working on a campaign. This is pretty common, but not so appropriate if I'm working in other fields. The assessment framework example, I thought this was interesting. Somebody had asked me about this. Knowledge, skills, and dispositions. These are things that came out of the LEAP work, the civic-minded graduate school domains. So some of you might be directing graduate programs, right? So it's both volunteer, communication, and listening, and valuing community engagement. I'll give you a minute to read this one. Again, this is part of what the traits of the School of Education here at Highlands was looking for. Ultimately, that last line, we want the student to feel a sense of responsibility and some commitment.
Just a culture change.
Culturally inclusive. I think this is a challenge from the get-go. When we make our definitions, again, we don't want opportunities to be limited so that students are only exposed to one sector of the economy, of the society. How do we consider, for example, this was a big debate, big debate. Can I do service learning on campus?
It's inclusive for more people in some cases.
And boy, if I'm a working parent, or I get pregnant in college, and I'm at New Mexico Highlands, and now I can't go. Now am I being limited? No, you want to create. And ironically, I can think of my most recent service learning. We had a group of students, we lost some frontline staff in registration. So I pulled in some of our student leaders, and they were there to help translate and work with our students as they're standing in line trying to get registered, because we were slow. And it really helped those students who were just 10 hours shy. And they were doing a wonderful service for us. It was a direct link to the kinds of things. Now, granted, in this case, it wasn't directly linked to a particular class, but it was important. So when we think about diverse students, even though we have a residential institution, how do we allow them to participate? And I would advocate that you think seriously about what is and is not acceptable on campus, because we don't want students just, again, getting coffee and hanging out on campus with the buddies. But if it's something like the Mount Trashmore example, and some of the sustainability activities where they were literally creating vermiculture or they're planting, these were things that were very much linked to student learning outcomes. The good news is it's an authentic experience. High five. High five. Simply doing it. It's an authentic, well, we're done. That's easy. That's natural. It's right there in the literature. Things about professionalism. This was one of the traits, but I think it's also, you'll see it in the essential skills in the Mexico HED, right? How are we measuring this? This is George Koo. $15,000, what should they do? Show up on time. Majoring and showing up on time. Boy, what a great way to show this. And oh my gosh, one of the joys, if you'd like, I would be happy to come help with some of this stuff. One of the joys was a 3-week discussion on logbooks. How do we correctly log student participation in activities like internships, blah, 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 blah. And some of them are, you know, industry related, or there's an external accreditor, like someone with the business schools or some of the medical programs. And so that was easy. But with social sciences, physical sciences, you know, things, how do you log this in a way that we're making sure the student came to work, did the job, you know? If you need help, let me know. But that's one of the, you'd be surprised. Like, how long? We need to restrict the number. We'll just make a decision. And linking it to the student code of conduct.
Can I ask you something that maybe it's not so linked with this, but it was before?
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, if this service learning is part of your class, and I'm sorry for interrupting, but I really want to your opinion, and I have to go. You do this part of your class, no matter how of the 3 methodologies, but you finally are going to grade this and are going to consider that this is part of your class.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that is fair for the students? I mean, I know that I'm completely sure that through this kind of learning, they can learn more than in any theory or whatever. But what happens if we send the wrong student to the wrong place? That can break the program completely.
It could.
And then some students may not even like this way of learning, and they are destroying community instead of building community. You know what I mean?
Can I just say one thing? In our series of workshops next semester, one of the things that we talk about is building relationship with the community that's providing the service, so that you have a good relationship with them and
independently of the students.
And so that it could probably be resilient to any issues that might come up, but that you would have that kind of more fluid.
And we talk in the former workshop that we did about that. We talk about this, that a bad student can...
Which we call vetting, right? You're vetting the organizations, but you're working with them.
But Paula, I wanted your opinion. Do you think it's a good idea to force the students to do this?
I don't think it's an idea. I advocated, I'm just going to tell you the end. We went with the hidden, and it's faculty led. We went with the most nimble because frankly, we had been on the other extreme with a staff member, and it created so much bureaucracy that students and faculty had a struggle. And it wasn't, I mean, this person had too much on their plate, and the person who designed the program had left. So I found that having it faculty led, because faculty wanted, it was much more organic and it felt better. But we still risk this. And I want to comment that, okay, Sarah, so I'm working hard as a faculty member, and I have a relationship, say, with the food bank and forage farmers, and I've got, you know, these organizations, and I've got it down, really down. Something changes. Carol was there and she's great, and now she's left, and the new person comes in and they're inappropriate with one of my students.
Yeah.
One of the things we did is, my big deal was creating, speaking of the LMS, and I rely on this, is yes, we had a physical handbook. This is how you do it. How-tos, checklist, this. Because as a faculty member, I don't want to figure this out on my own. But secondly, I put this all of this information and all of these resources, everything from considerations like, you know, students with disabilities, how can I make sure that they can't work in SAKS? What else could they do? But we actually created discussion boards so that if Sarah said, yeah, this was a great organization, and I came back a year later and said, well, you know, Carol's gone, you know, we'd have some problems, people were able to respond. I also want to go back, you had a great question, so I'm coming back to the umbrella in just a minute, but this is a book that I had wanted to read. There's a Janet Eiler who is a specialist, and she's in my materials. Janet is great, right? She's written on some seminal works on service learning. This guy is Joshua Eiler, so I've got 2 J Eilers, forgive me. But this is a book, How Humans Learn. So I wanted to give you the crib sheet because, again, if you don't go with service learning or you do something else, I wanted you to have a takeaway. So here's the crib sheet. Failure is not a bad thing. Failure is a way, cognitive, and so why did it fail? So in your reflection, the student has to write a reflection, you're going to grade them, and the student says, listen, I went, and it was terrible, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, so I'm not going to pass you because you didn't put the effort in. Here's the professional, here's the things that we were expecting you to do. Or the student did everything in their power, then you still, I would pass the student would still get credit. But we would discuss, that would be a teachable moment about things don't always work out. That's part of what we want them to learn. So when they go out in the rest, and I don't mean just the work world, I mean in their personal lives.
Yeah.
I'm a little offended sometimes at that. Relationships fall apart, right? Friendships end. How do you rebound, and resilience and grit is something else I think we're going to be talking about in the future.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I was just gonna say, I was laughing because this happened in my freshman service learning, and a group actually made their 5-minute video about their failure. I didn't ask them to do it. They didn't. So they were doing a presentation, so they made a video about their failure. It was great.
Yeah, and of course, I think that failure. I'm more saying for the consequence, I don't know, in the organization itself, in other place, if they destroy something, or I don't know, if they traumatize someone, or they go traumatized, or things like that. But that happens all the time.
Fire and chainsaws.
Yeah.
I was thinking of,
Yeah, people are not there,
if I'm working with an agency, or maybe I'm working on, like an MDS sheet. So we used to call them MDS sheets. I'm sure there's a different term for them now. Yeah. But really, that's an outcome, right? That I would be working. I'm working with this agency, and I'm helping them revise how these things, and maybe making them easier to read or something. I mean, that's a kind of service learning. It sparks my curiosity, right? And it's a technical kind of skill that I would need in the work world. I mean, as somebody comes out of a completely different form of academia, I wouldn't think that I would actually know this, but I was managed, I was the associate dean over the arts program, and believe me, fire is a big concern in an art studio. Sociology, working together. So the group that did the failure thing, they were working together. Emotions, okay. In fact, we know that's the retention right there. All the research that I read about retention is, I connect to my teacher, I connect to other students, I connect to the institution and my community. And sometimes it isn't always pleasant. Authenticity, right? This is real. This is a legitimate experience. It's much more legitimate for me than, getting up and going, okay, and actually sat through these, right? The MDS sheets must be placed on the appropriate. Like, oh gosh. So right now, when I leave this, we're going to my beer class, and we started talking about chemistry. I'm like, I would have learned chemistry a lot faster if you'd involved booze from the get-go. I would probably be a chem major talking about it. And that failure is part of it. So Josh Eiler's How Humans Learn is a hot book. There's the crib sheet. But I think it takes us back to exactly what you're talking about, right? What do we do when they fail? So.
But I think inserted in this is always, and consistently it brings to mind this issue of maturity. And for me, that's where I'm going to come back to Gardner and speak about this. The difference between pedagogy, andragogy, and hudagogy. We're supposed to scaffold them, right? And oftentimes the scaffolding process is BA, master's, PhD. That's a long time period, and we're talking about maybe making it more concise within a 4-year, 5-year BA program. And so by the time they're finishing 400 level courses, they're self-engaged, they're self-determined, they're aware of their learning, they're invested, and they automatically assign themselves into those courses that have a service learning component because they recognize the value, they recognize the learning. But when we're working with freshmen, they're mocositos. They're,
the first year experience. And you're speaking to my heart, because I've fought some ugly battles over transfer, right? It's coming out of the 2-year institutions. I've worked in 4-year in big universities and private and, international. And the 2 years often struggle with transfer. And I'm like, okay, if you can sit down and show me through your assessments the difference between a 100 level and a 200 level course, good. Show me the difference between a 200 and a 300 level course. I can pretty much guarantee I know what a 400 level course looks like. But a lot of folks struggle, even as scholars. Why is this level junior and that level is sophomore? And I think that is one of the things that any process like this does is it kind of stirs up the dust, doesn't it? You know, and you just hit it on the head. Alignment is key, right? How are we aligning? And we haven't done this as a culture in higher ed for about 100 years.
Yeah. We approached the registrar's office to see if there were criteria for being able to develop how, you know, particularly now with the state alignments happening, what is the difference between 1, 2, 300, and 400? They had no clue. They were saying, well, we've always left it up to departments. And
Exactly.
So there's no real criteria in place.
And then you go to your discipline, American Sociological Association. What's the difference between a 200? And it's even on the website, I can't find something like quickly. That should be like curriculum 101, right? No, it's extremely difficult. But I think, and I will stress this again, like with assessment, this should come from faculty first. This is where we should take the reins. And we define what an internship is versus a service learning experience versus for New Mexico Highlands. You own that process then. I wanted to make sure I got to this slide. This is very useful. And why, Blanca, yes, I will send this to you because these are the classic questions that you ask a student in a reflective essay.
Great, thank you.
So notice we can say, did you change your mind? Is your value or opinion? Has your willingness to help others change? What have you learned about yourself? So you don't have to use all of these, but you can do this as an oral interview, which I think of as when I think of universal design for learning. Not everybody's comfortable writing. I can do this as a video. They could videotape themselves and send me a YouTube video. They could journal it. They could write a response paper. They could do interpretive dance. They could do it as a graphic novel. I don't care. However your learning object comes out. And I'm experimenting now with what's called ungrading. And I do have a student who's opted to do my class as a graphic novel. So the idea that, how you will accept this might be an opportunity to create creativity, but ultimately those questions on the right will help us. How did you meet the student learning outcomes? What tasks did you do? What is the impact of what you learned? And then these are more granular questions depending on your program and how you want to ask. What did the student come away with from that experience? So I'm going to continue. Knowledge was another one, but here we go. I wanted to give this as an example for graduate. This came out of the University of Virginia. So this is a portfolio to assess student learning, and it may be something we want to take back to Jesus. The idea that the student creates a portfolio and they reference all kinds of things, and it includes, it can be the letter of verification from the expert employer. It can be my presentations, maybe the product. Like I said, I wrote a handbook. One of our students wrote a pamphlet on vermiculture, how to set up the vermiculture box. The work products, strategic plans, websites, etc., audio, video recordings, the student performing, and then they create a conclusion to their learning experience. Maybe this is something he would want to consider. This is an example, believe it or not, from a graduate program. So portfolio might be the way, because that leads me to some of the next stuff. This is, now I'm speaking to you, Eric, the assessment, okay? Ultimately, if you're designing backwards, right, we know what our outcomes are, and then we build our curriculum so the student meets those outcomes. Remember this? It was all exciting. We flipped the classroom. Remember this? This was a big deal. And then those outcomes per course, and then these 6 or 7 courses maybe feed in, or these hopefully 42 hours will feed into that 120, 129 hour degree. And as we meet those, outcomes or objectives, in some cases they call them, for the degree. This is what we want the student to have. So when we think about student service learning, where are we going to keep the information? Oh boy, it's easy for me to sit here on a Friday afternoon and go, oh yeah, the faculty just keeps it in their office. Well, okay, now we got to report out. And I don't like the dog and pony show that is often assessment, but ultimately, in any other human situation, how did you know it happened? So where do we do this? Do I send this, so many students? The nice thing, Sarah, with a credit is, in our case, you can simply just pull the data. How many students registered for a Serve 1096 class? And we had this, when we first introduced it, you had this lovely spike. Oh, that looks great. You know, you could graph it out. How many certificates did we print? You know, which degree programs did we print these for?
And I like the idea of looking at that repository, because that way this year's students could see what last year's students did, and again, we're showing a trajectory for learning that they could actually incorporate into service learning projects that are building on what had previously been done. Because again, you know, I'm thinking, well, here in Las Vegas, we're a smaller community. We don't have a whole lot of non-for-profits where we could position and do the internships in this. So we tend to kind of revisit and go through the same thing over again and replicate what had been done previously. And for the service provide or for the agency is to say, they're not that they're getting tired that every year we send a student, we place a student, but again, it's not really contributing to them because it's redundant to a degree.
Exactly, and I think that's why when I gave you the different types, I like the advocacy and the research-based, the indirect, because maybe I can drive down to Santa Fe, or even I'm in Albuquerque visiting my relatives, and I come across an agency, I do an interview, I do some assessments, you know, the 21st century, we're in Zoom, right? Somebody may be on the other side there. We could do Zoom, we can do Google Hangouts, I can meet with the employer, and if I'm creating a product, like a manual, if I'm creating a report, if I'm doing, you know, some number crunching for them, then I can do that remotely. Maybe that's something that, you know, certainly, like as Sarah said, if you had an office, a staff, you could do that. Or certainly you could create within some type of resource, what could we create so that the students would have ultimate choices? And the other thing I think would be interesting is we created some videos to orient faculty to the process. It's much more powerful if you create, and we had an orientation for the students. We created a video. It'd be much more powerful if we had students talking, because students listen to students more than they listen to us. We just know that, right? The research says it, but we know it, right? So if it's introduction to service learning, here's what we expect you to do. You know, instead of having the dean of students say, follow the code of conduct, here's how, you know, here's why the code of conduct is important. You know, you're representing New Mexico Highlands University when you are off campus, just as much as when you are on campus. But I also think too, you know, this is where those cross institutional discussions are important, because IR is going to come back to you and go, where is this? Okay, are you guys going to keep it for us? We're going to keep it in a spreadsheet? We're going to keep it in a shared document? Or, you know, how are we going to measure the student experience? Like you said, if they had a bad experience, surveys, interviews, do they have an exit interview when they graduate that we talk to them about this?
And I just want to comment that in our outcomes assessment for our departments, I think it's fairly easy for us to revise our plan if we wanted to include a SLO for service learning and measure it that way. I'm in favor of streamlining. I think trying to keep track of things in different places is not great.
A friend of mine just joined an organization and she said all they do is share the document via email. I'm like, oh, no, that's my private idea of hell, you know. Which version do you have? You know, that's the whole point of these shared document systems. But who can get access, who can get in, how will they be presented, and what ultimately you have to ask, how is it easiest to report in a way that your accreditation teams and those who are reporting to the state, because that's not a happy story, because I like to start, I mean, I'm much happier with talking about the wonderful experiences our students have and how they engage the community. But eventually, this is something we've got to consider. So,
sorry, I have to go.
Have a lovely.
I think the lady might go for 50 minutes from now.
And this
Thank you so much for everything you teach us.
You're welcome. And Blanca, as you go out, think about this thought. Like, what do you not want to happen? I love this. Sometimes you don't always know what you want to have happen, but I guarantee you, you know what you don't want to have happen. And really make sure you write that down so you go, oh no, this is not, we're not going to wind up, okay, HLC is coming next week and we need this data, and now I'm staying up until, you know, 2 o'clock in the morning trying to find where the spreadsheet was. That's not a happy song. It's not a productive use of time. And this it needs to be not a token. It needs to be something that's part of the campus community.
Can I share my nightmare? I have 2 program reviews going on right now.
Happy Thanksgiving.
2 of the programs I'm working with are under program review. And I've not been secure, consistent in my assessments, particularly the service learning component.
And I think that's why when I go back and I say, talk to, and so, you know, I'm not going to do this poll everywhere, but this is for us to put it out and project.
You're enjoying that now.
Oh, you want to do the poll everywhere? It actually is. I can open it up for you if you'd like. It actually is. What do you not want to happen? It's a larger team. I'll pull it up then. Because really, it helps you get your mind around, like, this is not where we are going. Okay. What do we not want to happen? Let me make this go live. What do you not want to happen? Inconsistent assessment, yeah. If my blessing for the university is that you do not scramble at the last minute. Here's the documentation. That you're very clear on how this aligns with the New Mexico Highland Strategic Plan, how this aligns with the New Mexico Higher Ed Department, how it aligns with HLC. You've crosswalked it and you've said, this is the reporting, and all I need from Sarah and Carol, from your department, please just send us this document and we're done. Just forward it on. Or here's this, you're responsible for going in and I can look instantly and tell if you inputted into a shared system. And it's important that you work with institutional research on that, because they should offer support and software and how they best want to do that. It's minimal work for the faculty. You have other responsibilities, lesson planning and grading and working with students, and that are much more important, your research. So this paperwork is the kind of thing that makes faculty mad. I feel for you. How did you wind up with 2 program reviews and 1 semester? Gaslighting. And gaslighting happens, right? I think about it with assessment, right? Dog and pony show. Oh no, it's real. Authenticity. It's authentic. How is it authentic if you're making us do this and we don't feel it? But just like we began with setting definitions, I think you need, you know, at one point in the process, before we go live, how are we going to capture this before you go live? And that's the joy I said in our case. I chickened out. I was like, oh, you know what? Just pull the number of courses, number of students, pass rate. Those are nice pieces of data. Okay, I set up 2 specific frameworks. And in our learning management system, I alluded to this earlier, I set up a handbook in collaboration with the team. And I like to say I did it, but we did it as a team. Put it together, and it's been so powerful that even 2 years later, 2 o'clock in the morning, I get this email across the world, you know, oh my God, where's the packet? Here it is. Here it is. The how-tos, the checklist, the forms, you know, this is what you do. So the faculty have it 24/7. You know, if I'm an early bird or a night owl, I can pull it up and I can plan for service learning in my classroom. You know, we decided on having department liaisons. So one person is part of their service, or are they advocating? How do we vet? I've talked about this. Form completion, record retention. Do we have something for troubleshooting, which is what Blanca asks us, right? How do we ensure that if something goes wrong, we have mechanisms to say, well, we no longer will use that agency, or we'll revisit, maybe we'll call up the agency that Carol left and find out maybe there's a different perception, things have changed. Is there support? And how will this work with registration? Likewise, we need a student impact framework, a video that explains to the student before, if for example, Jesus' example, welcome, you know, you're starting your sophomore year. Here's the video that all sophomores get. This is what we'll be expecting you to do. You know, by the end of the term, you haven't, you know, the entire year, but you need to contact X, you need to do this, be aware that the student code of conduct. And I think it would be very powerful to have videos from students talking about their experience. What can I expect? How much will it cost? For example, Sarah, if you did go with a certificate, would you charge for the fee? Would you charge a fee? Mm-hmm. Sometimes we feel like students don't like to be nickel and dime. On the other hand, this, when students pay, they have skin in the game, and we have administrative costs that are incurred from creating this if we want to do something professional. And certainly digital badging, there's no evidence that they're doing it for free. This is something where, how can I send this on to an employer? And student protections as well as student code of conduct, right? How do we make sure that the student is protected? So there's the next steps for the team. What is your definitions? What are your decision points? What kind of curricular offerings? What's your assessment methodology? Would we have a committee? Would you put yet another committee?
You guys are the committee.
An action team?
Sarah, you are the committee.
You mean the advisory board for the CTE? Yeah. We have two now. Yes, Carol's on one as well.
One of the things everybody in assessment gets being done is feedback loops. Yes. When I assess student learning, what did I do to change? So we tell our story about service learning, or ultimately, like I have that framework, work-related experience. This is our story. And this is how it changed. And the powerful thing about telling your own story is Blanca said, when things fail, right? We tried these internships and we insisted they must be paid. And all these wonderful opportunities for unpaid internships came down our way. And boy, we blew it.
Well, even if, while you're talking, I was thinking, we don't even have the viability of offering some travel costs, travel allowance for students. That's how limited our budget is, and because we went through a strategic budgeting process as well. I didn't see it anywhere within, our administrative priorities where it spoke about student travel.
Well, I can tell you this, but badging's hot. If I were advising you, if you're considering the certificate or the badge option, there's a lot of grant money out there for that. That might be a source of resources.
We have been putting student travel in our strategic plan and budget request every year. We haven't gotten it, but we put it,
There's the strategic plan is up on your website right now. So vibrant campus life, right? Is that where you? But also, if I'm working remotely with an organization in Las Cruces or Carlsbad or, Hobbs or something, which I could be doing as a student here, right? I said advocacy, I'm getting ready to plan, we're going to support the city doing support for immigrant, DACA, which is a thing, right? We're gonna, I put together some research with my fellow classmates, and we all get our service learning, and we do a report, and we get together and we promote it. Then, what do I have to necessarily be in Hobbs? Not necessarily. I can be communicating by telephone, but like anything else, that logbook. I'm sorry, the logbook was like. We couldn't let go of the logbook. So how am I logging that, right? And which is the appropriate ways of communicating, which by the way, is going to teach me professionalism. Is Google Hangouts professional? I've used Zoom. I used Skype last night, which, how do I communicate in a virtual world? And I can effectively and produce a deliverable. Maybe not as direct as I went down and I helped harvest heritage chilies and met with a bunch of vets and had some interesting discussions and then wrote about it, but I still can do a meaningful service learning experience. Or the one-shot deal, we're doing an event and maybe it's over a break or maybe over Thanksgiving, we're gonna do an event where we're bringing awareness to. We did one with food, international foods, and had a food fair.
And Paula, I mentioned that we are in the process right now of discussing our 5-year cycle for strategic plan. And one of the areas that we have there is rather than community partnership, it is community involvement and civic engagement. So we're trying heavily to tie that in and give a little bit more strength to the diversity component as well.
And actually, the blessing is that when I look at the LEAP goals from 15 years ago, when I look at the School of Education, when I look at your current strategic plan, even though the wording might change, when I look at you're actually, it's started to trickle down and it's a shared language. And I think we're starting to even share understanding. So when you said diversity, we're starting to share what that means. Because I don't think even 10 years ago, we would have agreed with diversity. You know, it was ethnicity. It was a proxy for ethnicity. It wasn't different disabled. It wasn't non-traditional students. We didn't talk about first-gen students at all, you know, and their experience. We didn't talk about rural versus urban students. So when we think about diversity, we think about even access. Rural students don't have access to technology the same way. So what are we thinking about? So the good news is, you know, pat yourselves on the back because you're you know, riding those streams that I think are important. I'm seeing across the nation. Maybe we go to a conference and these are huge. So in our last, because this is a very small, is there anything I can assist you with here in your individual classes, coach you through ideas, other suggestions, questions you have?
Question, because right now everything is big on rubrics, right?
Mm-hmm.
All the LMSs have their quality matters rubric or what. Is there something like that, like a very general rubric about how to address or what specific components to address for the service learning?
I wouldn't say that there are rubrics per se, that at least not that I was finding, but there was an agreement on what the definitions were. So from there, you need to say that it's community-based and it's linked to the SLOs. And that was the big part here. Let me go. Combination of community service and classroom instruction. So is the student engaging the community? Are they meeting the student learning outcome? So however you assess the student learning outcome, like I joked, if the student presents it through interpretive dance, if they do it through a graphic novel, they have met the learning outcome if they demonstrate competency in that they understand. The same would apply here. They're just using service learning to meet that SLO. So maybe that saves you some time, Carol, because you don't have to redo the rubric. The only addition is when I think about things like, and this was one of the things of professionalism. If this is something you wanted to add, boy, that would be nice on a badge, wouldn't it? You know, that you reflected well on New Mexico Highlands University, you engaged, and you represented it in a professional way. Wow, I'm showing that to an employer, hire me, you know. And not to mention being some affirmation of my involvement, but don't sweat that one too much, I should say. You've already got the SLO, you've already got a way of assessing it. Do you care if I turn in a research report, or do you care if I meet the SLO by doing this activity?
Well, again, that could be part of the scaffolding criteria. First shot, last shot at this level. As a level of graduation requirement, because again, this ties into the marketability and the transferability of skill for employment purposes. It doesn't necessarily have to be at a freshman level that we're that tight.
And part of it is like old timers like me, who I'm still hung up on the research paper. You know, I'm still a bit of beer face, and you know, I was a sophomore and I had to turn in 12-page papers that were typed in if you screwed up on pages. But that necessarily is no longer the required artifact. Are those the skill sets I need? Maybe, maybe not, to be successful as a graduate. Maybe it's just as legitimate that I had done something more profound instead of just sitting in with my books in the library. Maybe if I'd done something more profound. Now granted, my typing skills are great, so are my reading skills, but I could have also maybe learned about history, for example, because my undergrad was in history, by doing oral histories. I had a better experience in learning. I learned more about history by working in the archives for 6 months than I did in 15 hours worth of classes, because I actually had to learn how it was done. Go ahead, Sarah.
My question is about getting more faculty involved in service learning you know, and at the CT, we're always trying to get faculty involved in professional development. And my hope is that service learning is kind of a gateway hip, that people will be interested, will want to do that, and then other teaching skills will kind of follow. But I'm wondering how to incentivize this, because for myself, obviously, like my career has been service oriented, and I just care, and therefore I want to do service learning. I'm wondering how it can be incentivized at kind of a broader scale for faculty.
Well, first and foremost, I have to say that when I started as a new faculty, this sure seemed pretty intimidating. So if you make it a clear pathway for student, you know, for faculty and for students, so that, you know, here's what I have to do. And then like I gave you the first example, it's actually pretty easy, right? I do a little work up front, student gets a great thing, sends me an all-on grading is a reflective essay against the rubric that I use for the SLO anyway. So I wasn't doing a lot of work, but boy, it was sure intimidating. And for me, as someone who comes from, you know, the book learning side, you know, humanities, social sciences, you know, oh my gosh, going out into the community, I wouldn't know where to start. That's what business majors do. That's what social work does. So one of the things was helpful for me was when we started having people partner. So the committees were great, or maybe I have a mentor, or the idea of an advocate, a liaison was exciting because I had people in the department who were on fire about these activities in professional development. So they were able to guide other faculty to success. And I wish I'd had somebody when I started to go to and go, how would I even do, oh, Paula, it's so easy, you just do this, 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 and this. Incentivizing, I think, I was thinking first of all, foremost, in getting paid. Right? I mean, and we got to be careful because, you know, like I said, if baby steps are probably better. As a faculty member, ironically, as much as I would like money, my first foray into this, maybe I just only, you know, if 1 or 2 students participate, that's great. That's great. I've learned and I've gotten some experience and it's not intimidating. But when I think of my service and when I think of my professional development, how am I developing my skill sets? What are the resources that New Mexico Highlands are willing to give me? Like, you know, if you're bringing someone, you know, the consultant in to talk, or is it opportunities for us to explore different things, maybe visiting, right? If I'm looking at a travel budget and I'm saying, okay, I can go to my regional ASA membership, I can go to ASH, or would you be willing, even though this is not directly for my discipline, I'm not presenting a paper this year, you know, it's an R&R right now. I'd like to go to perhaps the NASPA, the big student affairs organization, because they're going to have something special in student learning. Or one of the things we did in with the first year experiences, we sent a team to visit a successful FYE school that had really worked with the first year experience, and it was exciting because they were talking to colleagues, and that really. There's something about you get in religion when you go to a conference and you get out of your skin. It really is. As much as I love the virtual world and I can be in my pajamas and get my work done, there is something about meeting, like it's just exciting for me to meet, you know, New Mexico, because I heard such great things and I'm excited about this. And it really is. There's something about getting religion on a Friday afternoon for Thanksgiving. And that, you know, so make sure that when you're thinking about travel opportunities or professional development, you're not saying, oh no, why aren't you going to Texas? That's where your regional conference is. Would you be willing to send a team or bring somebody in from another school to walk around and see if this is how it works?
That's a great
Sarah,
suggestion.
if I could maybe suggest, within language and culture department, our scholarship criteria for promotion and tenure, we use that Engage scholarship. I can't remember the name of the author that comes around that started framing Engage scholarship, which includes action research, you know, the service orientation you're speaking to, but also recognizes both from the instructional and from the research perspective that if you're facilitating for students to be involved with service learning and civic engagement projects, that it counts in your favor as well.
And that's been sort of the hang up, because we do have some department culture around excellence and professional development. I don't think it's across the board. So I wanted to figure out how to reach people who might be in other kinds of departments that don't.
I have a stupid
Also,
cheesy
if we're
idea
looking at
too.
interdisciplinary activity, that makes sense, and it's incumbent that we develop that sort of institutional culture that's in place.
Well, I have a silly approach to this. We had this odious training we all had to do, where you literally had to log in. Somehow the feds decided that everybody do hazardous chemicals. He teaches religion. He's never gonna, well, you know, he could come in contact with the toner. No, we don't let him touch the, like, why would you, so anyway, so what we did was, and this was the dumbest thing, but we did kind of a Gantt chart, and we did a competition. So literally the departments got whatever, pizza, potluck, whatever, it swag, believe it or not, it worked. It worked. We're like one of the best schools within the institution in terms of compliance, because people are they're naturally competitive. And then the dean was like egging people on. Oh man, you guys aren't doing very well, are you? You're not participating. And it was horrible. And I was coaching people. It's like, open up 2 computers and watch it, and then get to the exam and then go back and forth. It was 40 minutes to take this stupid exam. Anyway, the thing that really helped was this kind of rah, let's try it. And that was an incentive. The other thing with professional development, and I'll share this because I shared it with Veronica, is we have an excellent person. She's amazing, a friend of mine, Erica Reed. So in this fall, we do kind of a down and dirty, faculty focus day. How to read your paycheck was one of my personal favorites. We're introducing digital badges. How to read the new, we have some new transfer course titles. It's some real practical stuff. But in the spring, when people are getting toasty, they're burnt out a little bit, they're getting exhausted, they're going into yet another high conference season, we did more inspirational. So books like Make It Stick. Oh, Josh Eiler's great. I mean, I tell you what, I'm standing him. There's the Digital Pedagogy Lab up, Sean Morris is up in Denver, University of Denver right now, I think, Denver. I mean, there's some really, you want to inspire people. It's self-reflective teaching. I think it was his name, Brookfield, spoke to us, and we all got copies of the books. And I think it was, if you keep the focus on inspirational teaching, so more, I would call more higher order, because in this presentation, I've done some of that, but then we've got some down and dirty. How are you going to register for this? Why is service learning such a great thing? How can we, those differences. So fall, down and dirty, spring, all, so we were talking about the importance of universal design for learning, how we can take a course that will help all students be able to see, hear, understand the material, to be clear how those principles could help us all learn. And there's some really, it's worth your money if you bring in a scholar that's going to be inspirational, going to be there, but, vet them. We had a speaker at University of Arizona years ago, Naomi Wolf, and she was not a nice lady. I was not impressed, but you want somebody, and we've had a lot of good luck. And like I said, I follow some of these folks on Twitter, and they can be very, very inspirational about teaching and learning. And then your focus when you choose breakout presentations is about teaching and learning. Kind of the cognitive theories, and you mentioned Paula Ferrer's work, right, with andragogy and the pedagogy of the depressed. I think oppressed people, I want to read bell hooks again. I haven't read her since grad school. This is exciting, to have somebody come in. So if that helps, think about the timing in the academic year. Inspire them in the spring. Inspire them to feel good about it, and don't hesitate to. We do giveaways. We do cheap stuff. It's worth it. Those you'd be surprised who adopts service learning, successful completion. But I would say for me, first of all, as a new faculty, help me over the fear that this is just one more thing I have to do instead of something that's going to make my teaching easier. Okay, well, if most of my students are doing a service learning assignment for this SLO, then I don't have to grade that paper.
Sarah, several years ago, there were a variety of sponsored service learning projects that came out of the CT. Were those recognized, remunerated, premiated to any degree, or it was just the goodwill in the exercise on the part of the faculty member, right?
do we get paid a stipend? So
Some kind of
it was-
stipend?
So the way it was set up before is you get like $100 or something for doing a semester long, several workshops, and you plan out the syllabus. And then when you submitted the syllabus and got feedback and then taught the class, you were supposed to get a bonus. Something happened there, but in general, that was the idea. So it was, I didn't get the money. Yeah, it wasn't implemented.
No.
But I think it was
Because
because
that was
the
what, 3 years
media
ago,
was-
4 years ago?
3 years, something like that. Yeah, we had incentivized it. I've been reading recently about sponsorship for professional development, and having basically a buddy system. And I really like that idea. Maybe some people who have done this before can be sponsors and then bring new people in and kind of work with them. So they could be in the program, but then also have a personal contact with someone who can help them.
But it's a win-win, right? She gets something to put on her tenure dossier, right? This is my service. I led this effort and I was there. But also for me, you need to know about service. Okay, just go. She'll sit down, she'll take time, she'll walk you through the process. And that was really, in fact, we even debated, do you call them an advocate or do you call them a liaison? Because even the language is important in that. What was the role that I had, that I was liaisoning with? And then those liaisons actually met. And then again, think about our constituencies, the registrars folks, right? The IR folks, how are we doing assessment? That they were willing to do some of the, if we couldn't answer a question, they could go, they knew they had they had a community they built. But mentorships are crucial, and we tend to think of them as something you do with new faculty, but not continuing faculty. That there's moments where I really would need that mentorship, because I don't know about you, but my time is precious, and I've got to be strategic, and I want to make sure. But I also think we need to emphasize, just like we had this debate coming up, my husband and I, do you pay the kid for doing their chores around the house, or do you say, listen, you live in this house too? You eat the food out of this refrigerator, you're part of this family. And so this is part of some professional pride that you should have in teaching and learning. And I get it where there's pressure to publish or perish before teaching, but teaching is really a source of satisfaction. And I think if you really scratch that itch, people really, they do ultimately. I believe that most faculty really like teaching. They like their students. And they want, and sometimes even to the expense where I had a friend who was like, oh, I don't like those students, but I love these students. They come to my house and I throw them parties, and, like really, so I think that's you want to inspire them, and a little bit of competitiveness, some of those kind of, forgive me, but lowbrow motivations. You get swag if you try this, or you sit in this, that this is an exciting new thing. But I'd say before you roll it out to the crowd, do the definitions. Think about how you're going to do assessment. Solve some of these problems, because when people will come to you and go, well, why didn't you just do it as a certificate? Okay, we've already been down. We're not going to go down that road again. Consensus doesn't mean that everybody agreed. It means that we decided this was the best road. And if you feel strongly about it, when we revisit this, we'll put you on the committee. But seriously, make sure that, because that was the thing that I think our senior management, our executive, our vice president was concerned about, was that we wanted to have something concrete so that the faculty, and they love the idea of a checklist, right? For example, the handbook, oh, that's a great idea. And that helped create a lot of buy-in for folks. But I have to, the little sad legacy is we did the same thing with internships. We did what they call a soft rollout. And so there's still a lot of how is that credit gonna work? And is it gonna be part of the degree? And so we're kind of like little goldfish swimming back through that and looking at that castle again. Oh, we never saw that before. No, we've been there with service learning. So I think that, a more holistic approach. Get your definitions down, decide where you're going to keep the information, decide how you're going to assess, how you're going to offer it, and then roll it out. And it'll be a tighter ship, and you'll be less vulnerable to, why didn't you do it this way? I hope this has been helpful. Are there any other questions? And Sarah will love this because I've got one more Socrata quiz. But this is an opportunity for you to ask me. And in this case, I am going to put your names on it. So the question is, share any feedback or questions here, because if there's something I couldn't answer, or you want more information, or you want the authors, or...
Well, you're going to provide us with the PowerPoint, right?
Oh, yeah.
With slides.
But I just thought if you want me to respond to you specifically, send me your email, and I can, here's the question you had, here's my answer.
What is the login?
It's socratip.com, and at the top, I like this about Socratip that it took me 6 months to figure this out. I've been playing with this for months. I'm like, oh look, it's right there. Because Poll Everywhere doesn't do that. Poll Everywhere does a lot more sophisticated things. You can do a Gantt chart. You can do, but.
Well, thank you very much. I could go.
Oh, happy Thanksgiving. It's a pleasure meeting you. And
Yes.
What's next?
What's next? This is the last big event that the CT is hosting, but we have a couple of open labs coming up for people admin and Slate. If those are things that you platforms that you use.
Yeah, I got specifically on the service learning activity.
Oh, this our next iteration of this